Preface. If you let your mind wander back through history, you will find that the only thing that has not changed since the world began is podcasts.
So is that what you're going to have to do?
Podcast is the unchanging axis on which the world resolves. Don't say it like that. Don't say it like that. Is that the thing you're going to have to do? I might mix it up every fucking episode.
I was just wondering. This is a question people had. What
People
will
have
you
been
do?
having this
A
question.
dialogue-free miniseries?
And I think there are multiple ways around it. Ben is pantomiming right now. And in certain episodes, I might describe his pantomime and put the word podcast into my description. Other episodes, I might use an establishing card like this. Other times, I might do a tagline. I don't want you to know where I'm going.
Oh, you want to be totally unpredictable here.
Yes.
Absolutely. I support you.
Thank you.
I wasn't saying that just
Comedic invention. I want to have the sense of spontaneity. But of course, the podcast is the unchanging axis in which the world resolves. We all know that.
Yeah, it's a great prologue to Three Ages.
You know what more movies should start with?
Titles about love being
Father
in the axis.
Time himself.
Yes,
Just one solitary shot of Father Time sitting there.
I do think Father Time is, he is not in the world of IP and heroes and iconic. Yeah, we don't bring in Father Time anymore. You Data, you could talk.
Name
Please.
me a movie in which Father Time is not a silent character. Doesn't exist.
No, it's true. He's always showing up.
You know what I'm saying? Like, he's up there with God, where you could basically start any movie with Father Time just tapping on his watch and being like, when are we starting this thing?
But, like, why did we drop Father Time? Is he too similar to, like, God, like sort of generic God, and it got mixed up?
This is what I like about him. I'm like, he's non-denominational, you know?
Yes, exactly.
We can all buy in on this guy. Here's another classic white dude with long beard and white flowing hair.
I mean,
and robes.
did either of you see the awful Alice in Wonderland sequel, Alice Through the Looking Glass?
Of course, where Sacha Baron Cohen plays Time.
Sacha Baron Cohen is basically playing Father Time in that. Yes.
Is he in an old man beard?
He has a beard.
He's a mechanical clockwork man.
Yeah, he's sort of a clock man.
Yes.
I remember that being one of the more fun, because it's a time travel movie, right?
He's good in that.
Yeah, he's one of the more locked in parts.
I feel like we've had this argument because, Dana, we unfortunately cast a spell on ourselves, a curse, and had to cover Tim Burton's Alice in Wonderland on this podcast. Still, I think the worst movie we've ever discussed.
I mean, maybe you love that film.
I was just going to say, you went back for more after the first Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland?
We did not.
You had to cover it as a critic.
I think I covered it as a critic.
And then I didn't see it in theaters. I saw it years later on Disney Plus. And it's one of those things. But it's one of those things where
it's
you're
not
like,
good.
It is better, but it is less essential. So everything the movie gains from being slightly better than the first movie, it loses by being a sequel to Alice in Wonderland, a thing that should have never happened.
That's true. This is a terrible way to start.
But Sacha Baron Cohen's good in it. I just want to say, I just pulled up here the Three Ages, the one shot of Father Time. Okay? We're talking about two movies today. It's a Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David.
It's a podcast about filmographies, directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want, and sometimes those checks clear, and sometimes they trying to do Foley work.
Was that bouncing?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have a rubber ball on me.
You could have just done that.
I wanted to make it sound like he was like falling down. That's the classic origin story of Buster Keaton.
You're gonna have to tell me.
Falling downstairs. We'll get to that in a sec. We got a whole itinerary of things to get through here.
So you fell out of your chair? Is that what happened?
Yes. Down a flight of stairs.
Down a flight of stairs. Okay, great.
We installed a staircase in the office just for this.
Just for
moment,
this.
Right?
We're going to do a lot of gags and stunts in this series, and they're all going to be physical.
We're definitely going to say gag a lot.
We're going to say gag.
We're going to say gag way more than we usually do.
It's going to be the most gag-heavy series we've ever done. It's the films of Buster Keaton, who had a very long career, but this miniseries is focused on the Buster Keaton Productions run, his wild run in the 1920s, where he had basically complete artistic freedom for 10 films. And then we're going to cover the first two MGM movies, which were the beginning and the end for him, at least in terms of his golden period. The miniseries is called Podcast Junior.
That's right. You said that was the only pick, and I support it.
It's the only pick. We're doubling up these films because they're short.
Yep.
So today we're talking Three Ages, and we're talking Our Hospitality. His first two directorial features.
Features, right? Would you agree, Dana? These are his first 2 full features.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he had been making films at this point already
Many
for
years, right.
6 years or
Right.
so, but yeah, they were all shorts and not independent until 1920. So this is really him busting into feature-length comedy.
Hey, busting.
Busting in.
And then Saphead is his first feature film as an actor, but that's him being hired as an actor.
Yeah, which is why that tends to drop out of retrospectives and
Yes.
Keaton filmographies and things like that. People forget about it, even though it's worth watching with a really remarkable ultra deadpan of all deadpans. Also, him playing a rich guy, which is this subspecialty that he's so
Yes.
good at, right? The incredibly useless, foppish dandy is a great subspecialty for him.
But it is like he's king of 2 and 3 reelers. He does that, and then they're like, "Don't get too big for yourself. Go back to shorts." And then this is when he comes out and is like, "Let me really take a stab at features."
And something worth noting actually is that not only were they his first feature comedies, but feature-length comedies were pretty unusual in
Yes.
1923. Like Chaplin's first one wasn't until 1921 that he directed himself.
This is primordial shit in several different ways for him in his career, feature-length comedies, and also just the genres he's already playing with and his ambition and setting this up. I guess say is Dana Stevens, the great Dana Stevens from Slate, but also the author of Cameraman, the great book about Buster Keaton. Now that we've done the setup, I just want to say, because I've had this sitting here, this opening image of Father Time. We have to get back to Father Time.
Of course. The first Chaplin features what, the kid? That's the first.
The
like,
Kid's
sort of-
the first feature length
right.
that he directed. He was
Right.
in an earlier one, but
Mm.
just like Keaton actually.
So this movie starts with
It's 3 ages.
We're
You're
gonna
talking
get
about
the context.
we have much to set up about.
But I
Mr.
just want to
Keaton.
talk. I want to front load this Father Time shit, okay? Because as we're saying, this is unmined IP. This is hot IP.
Sure, Father Time. There should be a Father Time movie. Right.
Well, Father Time should be in every movie.
Okay.
This shot here of Father Time, okay? Let's talk about what he's got going on here. Old guy, beard, long white hair, flowing
Scythe.
robes. Scythe. He's holding a scythe.
The scythe is a little intense.
Like the Grim Reaper.
Yes.
They're sort of quietly implying that Father Time also comes for us all. He's the guy who tells you when your time is up. And then in front of him on his desk, a couple quill pens, a skull, an hourglass, and a globe.
So he does kind of have a quasi-death vibe. You're right.
That's your basic desk set, really.
Right, the classic. But I like that he's like kind of God, death, and Father Time at the same time. Like they're making it seem like he's overseeing everything. He's the one keeping the trains running.
Yeah, but maybe that's what messed with him. Death becomes sort of a hot guy on his own right.
Interesting.
And then like the Sandman shows up.
Right.
And he's kind of in charge of sort of dreams and stuff. I don't know. Like
You're saying the reason Father Time, he's maybe too powerful. It's the Superman problem. You don't know how to put him in a modern movie.
I think it's the name. I think you just need to update it to like Time Daddy.
right.
Maybe Time Zaddy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That feels like it will read better for a more contemporary audience.
Pedro Pascal is
Yes.
Time Zaddy.
This is interesting. He's existed in some form since ancient Greek culture.
Mhm.
But then he kind of got merged with the Grim Reaper at times. And then with,
Okay.
like the scythe thing is
Yeah.
sort of the crossover with the Grim Reaper. I don't know. Never thought about him before. Not a guy I think
Right.
about.
I feel like sometimes I feel like he's presented as just like, what does he do? Clock in, clock out, keep shit running, right? Father Time's main job, make sure things don't go backwards. He's just gotta go forward, right? Time's gotta progress. And other times it's like, I'm coming, I'm collecting.
He's in the Santa Claus movies, remember?
Oh yeah,
Peter Boyle plays him,
Yes.
right. And then this classic, big guy, big beard.
Yes.
He has like a staff.
There's a what's it called? Rudolph Shiny New Year. The Rankin Bass special that has a lot of Father Time and Baby New Year. Baby New Year, another underexploited IP.
I definitely don't know what you're talking about. there.
Well, I was going to
Baby
say
New
the
Year?
main way you see Father Time is in this sort of like mid-century greeting
Yes.
card, right?
Yes.
Where the new baby year is
Yes.
arriving and old Father Time is passing out, which actually goes back to Christmas Carol, right? Because Christmas present turns
Mhm.
into this old man in one day.
Yes.
Do the groundhogs and Father Time work together?
This is the thing. There's so much IP here. We're not using any
Well, it's
of
pretty
it.
fungible. You can kind of do what you want with
That's what's good about it.
Right. But I'm going to make him non-fungible. I'm
Yes.
going to mint Father Time as an NFT. And
But
get
when I'm
rich.
saying this is good IP, obviously what I'm saying is less we should put him in movies and more we should put him in fucking digital stamps.
Right, exactly.
Right. But
That's
yes,
what everyone
no.
really wants.
It should be Father Time with his pet groundhog and Baby New Year. Baby New Year, David, the whole premise of Oh, here comes the new year like a baby and some naked baby wearing a sash with a year on it and a top hat. It's one of the funniest things that's ever existed.
I'm looking at it and it is funny. I'd never thought about this. In the Jews have the, at Rosh Hashanah, they talk about how like your name is getting written in the book of life.
Let's say we
talk about
we
it.
talk about it. You and I
Dana, you're
talk
not
about it.
Jewish, are you?
Mm-mm.
But you're,
Live with a Jew, though,
exactly.
so honorary.
Honorary.
And like I remember as a kid, I would really focus on that like there's some guy who's like David Sims, and I'm like, all right, phew, another year. I like that.
Yeah,
I like that more than a baby with a top hat.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's stop talking about this. Thank
Okay.
you. Yes, we're here to talk about Joseph Halley.
That's his
Haley?
father. Joseph Frank is
That's
Buster's
his
name.
dad.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he is also he's also Joseph.
Joseph.
He's a
Joseph-
junior, hence podcast junior.
Hey,
right?
Hey,
Right.
see?
Right.
That is probably why the junior is so present in his mind, right? Obviously, it's like a clean branding thing to go like, what's my movie? Understand a title that's usually held by a serious person, put junior on it. Now I play the worst version, the less together version of that.
And juniorness is also just so key to his persona, right? Because
That's what
he
I'm
grows
saying,
up
yeah.
getting kicked around by his dad. I
Yes.
mean, all those movies are about some
Look
father
how cute
figure.
he was. Oh,
Yes.
I'm looking at little pictures of baby. Oh man.
Oh, when you start researching Buster Keaton's childhood, you don't want to leave that rabbit hole. It's
What a
so great.
guy.
Can you find one without the hat, David? Because have you seen the wig they had him wear when he was a little kid?
The bald wig with
Yes.
the Irish, yeah.
They gave him a male pattern baldness wig that was so funny.
It is pretty funny. This thing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the ethnic Irish costume.
Man, is there anything more romantic in my head that was obviously bad
A nightmare.
than vaudeville families in
Yes.
like the turn of the century?
Yes. I mean, this is it's so much of what is so fascinating.
Hey, I don't
About-
think I'm offended by this.
Yeah, well, as
I
an
don't-
Irishman,
I don't like
What?
this.
That's not what they're like. They're not little bald babies.
I'm keeping my hat on today.
sad bald babies.
Damn.
Yes.
Yeah,
no, the more
vaudeville
you
families,
dig into
yeah.
the Buster vaudeville story, it's complicated to say the least.
It is weird that we presented Irishmen as these like bushy-haired men. Like that was some sort of stereotypical, presentation of an Irishman.
Yeah, but the leprechaun, right? Doesn't the Lucky Charms leprechaun also have sort of
You're
like
right,
a
yes.
bozo reverse mohawk kind of?
He's got funny hair. Now
I do.
that I
Yes.
think
No,
about
the
it.
leprechauns had the sort of hair just peering out wildly from underneath the hat. Yeah, Darby O'Gillis.
Guess so.
It was a thing. I guess it is more of a.
It's the stark red hair. you
Right, that
typically-
becomes
Sure.
more the classic thing. I guess these wigs may have been red. They're in black
I'm
and white.
guessing they're
Yeah,
very-
I think they're written up as red
Very
wigs and in descriptions of the time.
Yeah.
It's just I also think Itchy and Scratchy. The joke about look out, Itchy, he's Irish.
it's
They
true.
meet an Irishman. Like I think that was a thing back in the day.
Actually, the father son act is basically the Itchy and Scratchy show, right? The
Yes.
the three Keatons.
Yes. Yes.
With who was whatever. Wait, I mean Itchy is sort of the antagonist, or is Scratchy the antagonist?
Well, it was Buster was Itchy,
Right.
and
He was the little
Scratchy's the
right.
cat.
Yeah,
Yes.
Scratchy's
right.
the cat.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the pursued and the pursuer. But of
Right.
course, the joke is always in both cartoons and in that act that the tables get turned constantly.
It is, digging back into Buster again. I am a longtime Buster Keaton fan, but I've been going deep back into this as we prepare to do this series. The language of cartoons, like so much comes out of him. Not to give him full credit, but I feel like he crystallized a lot of things. And even that father-son act crystallized a lot of things. That's the dynamic of like Tom and Jerry and Itchy and Scratchy and most little guy, big guy. They're both trying to get the better of the other.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a chapter of the book that never came to be because the moment their act is happening is also the exact same moment that comic strips are first appearing
Yes.
in American newspapers,
right.
right? And so
The
he grew up
funnies.
seeing the funnies and wasn't among the first generation to see them. So
Yeah.
it's one of the many, many things that he obviously just kind of magpie style pulled from popular culture without ever thinking, I will do a comic strip on stage.
Right.
It was just in his brain as a kid.
But then he synthesizes it into something that then makes sense in motion, which I think then gets carried into animation out of comic strips.
Right,
know?
which shows
It's
you
like-
that movies are kind of the bridge, right?
Absolutely.
Live action is the bridge in between the comic strip and the
Yes.
cartoon.
Look, there's so
What
much
a
to talk about
crazy
here.
time. What did people do then before they looked at etchings? Like, what did they do?
The fact that
in the
minute
19th
3
century?
of like 3 Ages is Buster going like, and I'm gonna slide down a stop motion dinosaur.
Yeah, yes. I thought
Like
that was
Gertie,
pretty good. Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Is wild. Your book, Dana, is so great. I read it when it came out, or I even read it in advance because I think your publisher very kindly sent us some copies before some other episode we recorded with you. Maybe
I'll
Angel
read
at
it
My
again because
Table.
that galley had so many errors in it, Griffin. I'm ashamed.
I had the galley, and then I've been listening to it now as the audiobook, which Ben I know has been doing as well. And we were saying right before you recorded, you have such a good voice for audiobooks. You should just do them for
Great
other
voice.
people's books.
Oh, I wish. I love reading audiobooks.
You're
It's so
a
fun.
legendary podcaster. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, best voice in the biz.
Yes. But the thing that's so great about your book, and you've talked about that this was like the thing you always not found lacking, but that you wanted out of a Buster Keaton book that you couldn't find out there, was really placing him in the context of both what feeds into him that comes out in his work and what comes out of his work that feeds into the culture, in both directions. That
Yeah.
he's so much like this man at the center of the culture at any moment. He's so much a product of his time, a person of the 1900s who was really this figure of modernity as it was developing.
Yeah, he's just such a bridge between so many modes of performance that came
Yes.
before, or things like the comic strip we were just talking about, between so many strands of pop culture that preceded him, right? Because
Yeah.
he's born in 1895, and then the things that came after him, because he dies in 1966. And to me, just that lifespan is a reason enough to write a book about him. Like,
Yeah.
imagine living from 1895 to 1966. It's only 70 years. He died before he turned 71.
Yes.
But imagine how much the world changed during those years, right? And he's so much at the heart of that, and at the forefront of a lot of it. Making the changes himself without having ever perceived of himself as that.
But then also being able to recognize things like the funnies and go like, we should be pulling from this. This is a language that should be worked into this new art form. He's such a fascinating figure.
Mm.
I've been a fan of his for so long.
Yeah, when did you become a Buster Keaton fan?
When I was in high school,
Mm.
and I went through an obsessive period, maybe freshman or sophomore year, where I decided that homework was a waste of time and I was going to watch 3 movies every night. A period.
3 movies every night is
Mhm.
too many movies
Mhm.
for a night.
And you may be here that the wild success of this period was I came very close to getting kicked out of high school several times.
Getting kicked out of a high school that doesn't kick people out.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
I cannot explain how close I came to getting kicked out multiple times for the lamest reasons possible. Because people were like, "Were you like some hellion? Did you go through a drug phase?" And I was like, "No, I was just like watching silent films all night and then refusing to write papers on
Yeah.
ethical grounds."
Or sleep. Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. But yeah, so there was this period I had like a 13-inch TV VCR combo, much like the Ben Porch staple. And then I think when I was in high school, I asked if we could get another cable box to plug into that TV. And that's when like the fucking doors flew off of like, now I could just lock myself in my room and I have Turner Classic Movies and I can just like watch whatever's on every night. And they had just done a restoration of The Cameraman, and there was like a Robert Osborne hosted short documentary called So Funny It Hurts that I think is now still on the Criterion Cameraman release. That's about his sort of rise and fall around the MGM period, which is when he basically gives up his blank check and suddenly is beholden to a larger bank. But I like watched those 2 one night and went like, holy shit. And I think this was in this phase where I'm starting to get really seriously into movies after being a big movie kid, but wanting to be like, I want to know my history.
Right.
And so there's a lot of stuff that I'm watching compulsively as of like, I need to check that off. I need to have seen a movie like this. I need to know this time period just so I can throw out the reference points for the things. There's a lot of, desperate to prove myself, sort of completionism, where the watching 3 movies a night, a lot of times I was not even enjoying watching the movies.
No,
It was this obsessive need of like, I need to know more than everyone
It
else.
becomes this obligation. That's no
Right.
fun.
But silent film works so great for that. I've told a
So-
lot of people this while
Yes.
going around touring with this book, is that if you want to be some completionist nerd about Buster Keaton, it only takes like 2 weeks.
Yes.
You know,
No.
I mean, his filmography is small. The films are short.
Especially the main shit, you know?
Yeah,
if
that's what
you
I mean. The
really wanna
silent,
focus on-
golden
Yes.
era stuff. You can watch it
Yes.
all in 2 solid weeks. You wouldn't even be up late every night watching.
That's the thing. So it was like they were just doing that sort of series. I think TCM had done this restoration themselves, made this short documentary, and then a lot of them were playing. So like those 2 weeks, I was just watching Buster movies every night, and I very quickly had that thing of like, you know, you watch 3 movies a night. A lot of time, I'm eating fucking snack food, and I'm like, you know, texting people, and I'm like googling something, and I'm half doing homework I'm supposed to be doing. But then you're watching a silent film, you can't be doing anything else, right? You have to just be 100% locked in to that.
Right.
And so
True.
quickly, I'm like, oh, I'm engrossed in this. I'm actually finding this funny. This is not the compulsive, I just want to build up my film history thing. I'm like leaning into this. And then he just became like one of my top guys. So that was like 20 years ago. And I went through this compulsive phase of trying to watch as much of it as I can. And I still, you know, whenever they screen movies, his films in New York, I try to go see them again. Ben and I went and saw Sherlock Jr. this weekend.
This was my first time seeing it.
Where was it showing?
It was at the Paris Theater.
Did they have music? Live music?
Didn't
was-
have live music.
no.
I love that the Paris is showing Keaton. I did not know that.
It was because Tom Luddy, the Telluride founder, died, and they did a special series of like 10 films that either he worked on or were his favorites. So it was isolated. It was not part of a larger Keaton series, which I wish. But it was just a free screening at 12:30 on a Sunday of like the most perfect 45-minute movie ever made, which we got to see with a crowd who was like 100% into it and laughing. And that's the thing that's so satisfying to me. The reason I wanted to do Keaton for so long is that like I think a lot of people, understandably, are just like silent film might be one step further than I can go. Right? I just think that's going to feel like homework to me. I'm not going to get into this, even if I understand the sort of nutritious vegetable quality of this.
If you have ADD like I do, it's like
it seems
it's
daunting.
like I don't think I could focus on it for longer than like
It's
a few
like going to the
minutes.
gym for our phone addicted
Yes.
generation. Like we should all watch silent movies once a day.
That
just
may
to
be
like,
the case with a lot of the silent canon. I mean, I at this point have been watching it so long that like when I was rewatching this stuff for
Yeah.
this podcast, I didn't have my headphones handy, so I watched it truly silent.
Yeah.
Just like I was just like mainlining it, you know,
Yeah,
hardcore.
right.
Like I don't even need music.
Yeah, just
But
freebasing.
I do understand that there's an obstacle to get over, but I think that Keaton that's why he's the
This
perfect
is my
entry
argument.
drug,
This is
right?
my argument. This
Because
is why I wanted to do
I've
this.
seen this happen over the past
Yes.
year. I've been touring this book and I have seen, you know, roomfuls of people, many of whom had never seen a silent film before or Keaton before. Kids, you know, there was a kid on screen who had never seen a movie before. It was his first time in a movie theater seeing a real projected
Yeah.
movie. And I think it was Sherlock Jr. that time. And it plays every single time. There's no need for context.
No.
You know, he makes people laugh as reliably as he did 120 years ago.
Sherlock Jr. is the one you can always point to where you're just like, this feels incredibly modern.
yes.
It is actually funny. You're not going like, I get
Or,
it.
yeah,
People
or
are like,
I can
actually-
see why this amused people in the Depression or whatever.
It's not
yeah.
a historical context document. And my hope is that in doing this series, we will get people to watch these films for the first time and realize that they actually enjoy them.
And they are
Yes.
highly accessible.
Yes.
Like more accessible than anything.
Yes. This is the first miniseries we're doing where every film we're covering is in the public domain.
Have you ever done a silent series before?
No.
Wow.
No, we
This is
you know,
far and away. Some of
I'm
this-
honored to be here
exactly.
for the
This is,
inaugural.
I would not call this a risk for us or whatever, but like a few years ago, we probably would have been more reticent because, like,
Yes.
you know, we had the kind of podcast where like our numbers would dip if we just did something vaguely obscure. Like even within a filmography, maybe that was more
Yes, if we
well known.
if we covered someone's first movie.
Catherine Bigelow's The Loveless,
Right.
for example.
That's the example. That
Yes.
used to be our like, okay, so that's the lowest
That's the
our
rock
listenership
bottom.
goes.
Have you seen Catherine Bigelow's The Loveless?
I
Her
have
first
not.
film. It's not
Mhm.
bad. Very like heavy on the semiotics. You know, it's like biker boys
Yes.
driving their motorcycles. You know, it's very
It's semiotics thesis film.
90s grad student
Yes.
Bigelow.
Absolutely.
80s, but yes.
And it's like an
yes.
hour long, you know. But yes, look, I say this as a compliment to our listeners. We used to use like the Loveless as the metric against like, you know, Hurt Locker or Point Break in that same series, right?
Yeah.
Where we were like, you know, okay, if we do the Loveless, we will get 50% of our regular weekly listenership. If we do the Hurt Locker or Point Break, it'll maybe go 25% above what our regular listenership is. And then the ones that are sort of in the middle, that's whatever our baseline number is. And over the last couple of years, our numbers have remained very consistent where it feels like, oh, people will actually seek out the movie we're talking about and watch it and not just wait for the episode to
We
be
hope
something they've already seen.
with this.
So it
obviously.
just felt like let's try to do this. But
Yeah.
we've never done silent. Up until this point, the earliest film we have covered on the podcast is Fear and Desire,
Yeah, the
Kubrick's
50s.
first film,
We've never gone back
which
to the
is early
20s.
50s. So we're going 3 decades earlier than we've ever done, which
Yeah.
is exciting for me.
Yeah.
But yes, I'm hoping the feeling everyone will have watching these movies is, oh, these feel a lot more present and relevant than I expected.
Yeah, there's no question that Keaton has survived for the modern sensibility and modern sense of humor better than any comedian from that time, I think.
I
really
would
think so.
agree with that. And I would agree with that over, say, Chaplin.
I mean, just in terms of broad audience appeal is what I'm saying. I'm not
Yes.
even rating their artistry
Not-
right now.
not in
Like,
terms of-
obviously, I wrote the book on the one that I prefer of the
Yeah.
two, but even not comparing that, just they play better. They feel more modern.
And that's no beef with Charlie C. Who
Look,
made some
I
great movies.
love Chaplin as well. I greatly
too.
prefer Buster Keaton. If I pit them against each other in comparison conversations across the next couple of weeks, it's not because I want to shit on Chaplin. It's more that I want to spotlight the things I think make Buster particularly unique. But I think the Chaplin staying power has been more rooted in his films work so strongly as emotional stories.
Mm.
Right? That even as perhaps the comedy in them went a little bit out of fashion, they're movies that still play as like, well, there's an arc here that I understand. There are these clear emotional through lines. And then someone like Harold Lloyd, who I think often gets put into this box of like, that's someone you can watch and you understand the craft and the technique of what he's doing. For a lot of people,
I mean, I like Charlie. Now I feel mean that I was.
I'm not being negative.
What's,
But
City Lights at the end, he's crying.
This is what I'm saying. But that's my point. I'm like, the City Lights ending is like a thing that cuts through. Where
We
even
all
if someone's
remember, right,
watching it
right.
and they're like, I don't know if I find this funny today, you're gonna find him like the kid running to him.
Right.
Yeah, the kid is my favorite Chaplin feature, I think, still.
Kid's
And the best Chaplin of all is the shorts. The
Right.
really anarchic.
Which is sort of how you feel about Buster too, right? When I
Yeah.
was like, "Hey Dana, we're doing Buster Keaton. Like, are you interested in anything in particular?" You were kind of like, "Well, the shorts are the most interesting."
Well, I'm so happy we're doing a bonus segment on the
we
shorts.
are,
Patreon will
yes,
come out
on Patreon we'll have
in
that.
4 days, May 11th.
But I have to say, the reason when you gave me this very tempting list of
Yeah.
different shows to select from, I was really torn because these two movies we're talking about today, Three Ages and Our Hospitality, while great, are not my favorite Keatons at
I
all.
agree.
It's like Three Ages is nobody's favorite Buster Keaton movie. It's
No.
his very first feature, and it's like it feels very primordial in some ways. But I just
Yes.
wanted to be in on the ground floor of this
Yeah.
series.
I think you're the perfect person to help us set context for all this. I do think, though, if anyone watched these two movies and they're like, I'm not as on board as Griffin and Dana are, maybe I'm not a Buster Keaton guy, you're watching two movies where he's figuring it
Right,
out.
he's- that- right.
And they have moments of absolute brilliance and technique, skill at display. But I think after this point is when he's really firing in all cylinders.
And it really doesn't matter where you enter in. There's no need to start
No.
here. I mean, I
No.
often tell people to watch The Cameraman first if they want to start with a feature.
Cameraman and Sherlock are the two that I always recommend to people that I think just follow the modern rhythms of films.
And then my personal favorite, I mean, it's something that changes throughout your life, but I would say Steamboat Bill Jr. is just my personal favorite Keaton movie. It gets a whole chapter in the book because there's
Yeah.
just so much there.
I
What's
am-
your personal favorite?
My personal favorite is Cameraman. I think Sherlock Jr. is the best, quote unquote. But I'm also like, I just think that's one of the best movies ever made. I think that's just a perfect work. Steamboat Bill Jr. is the one I've never liked as much as other people, but I'm very excited to rewatch it for this. I have no problem with it.
I think maybe for me it's just because it represents if you know something about his career and life, it becomes a film that you see as very pivotal. It's his last true
Yes.
independent movie, right? The last movie in which he did exactly what he wanted to do. It echoes things from his own life and the junior stuff we were talking about, resolving his relationship with his dad
Yes.
in this way that feels completely unconscious and organic, right? Like he's not Ari Aster. He's not setting out to resolve some emotional issue. He's
Yes.
just trying to make people laugh. But in his own life, he's at this moment where he's starting to let go of the shtick he and his dad had done, And so it brings up this very poignant question of what would he have done next if he had still kept his freedom after that year?
Absolutely.
Right,
No,
so
I
there's the mystery.
I always enjoyed it, and it's one I've rewatched less, and I'm excited to rewatch it with the context of, your book
I
and
just
many other
preferred
things
when
I've
he was a
learned.
mouse. I mean, I had to make that joke.
Steamboat.
right? That is a parody of Steamboat Bill in some sense, right? At least in title.
Yeah, here's another thing. I think a lot of the Disney animation is very influenced by Chaplin, which I think was even basically acknowledged by Walt Disney at
That
the
Mickey
time.
Mouse is Chaplin.
Mickey Mouse is a Chaplin character. Looney Tunes really feels like the descendant of Buster Keaton.
Absolutely. Yeah, he's much more of a Bugs.
Yeah, and even though the persona is different, Bugs is so much more aggressive.
Rascally.
Right.
Yeah.
I was like, even watching Sherlock Jr. with Ben, I was pointing out how many gags are sort of setting up the type of cartoon logic that animation's going to run off of for the next 60 years. There's things, even in Three Ages in particular, where you're just like, that's not a big physical stunt. That's not classically what people would think of as maybe Buster Keaton's skill as a gag writer in the popular, the mainstream consciousness. But I think it's as much a part of his core genius is his sort of subtle rewriting of reality in ways that feel like they can get at a static truths or point out the absurdities of our own lives and absurdities. David,
Yes.
looking at our ad copy for this week.
Yeah.
And it says intros and thought starters.
Yeah.
Not a script. Use these ideas as a starting point. Put in your own words. And that's highlighted. It says host ad lib.
Yeah.
Give a shout out to a member of your team who works tirelessly behind the scenes. And you know who I'm going to choose to make that shout out to?
Me, David Sims.
Ben Hosley.
Ben Hosley.
Whoa.
What?
What?
Look.
Come on.
Ben, you're actually probably the biggest user of stamps.com of any of us.
This
anyway.
is why I'm saying this.
And you know, they help businesses like yours and ours save time and money.
It says if you have someone who specifically handles shipping, and that's definitely Ben. I want to talk about how hard they work and what an important piece of the puzzle they are. Ben, this show wouldn't exist without you.
Well, I really appreciate
It wouldn't exist in its infancy, and you're the one who keeps it afloat.
That's all true, also true, but it also just wouldn't exist without stamps.com.
That's the
because all you need is a computer and a printer, and they send you a free scale. You have everything you need to get started.
Ben's the most important member of this team.
Right. Ben's like number one, then stamps.com.
Ben stamps.com.
And then like maybe Griffin and David tied or whatever.
Marie,
Yeah.
and then you
Marie,
and I.
and then Griffin and David. And honestly, JJ and Alex and JJ. And,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of good.
Right.
All right.
We're at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah, exactly.
definitely.
Look, if you need a package pickup, you can schedule it through your stamps.com dashboard.
Uh-huh.
If you sell products online, wow. Stamps.com seamlessly connects with every major marketplace and shopping cart. They got some premium discounts.
Sure.
Up to 84% off UPS and USPS rates.
David said wow because there was a lot of noise coming from the hallway.
Yes,
and that noise was a barrage of people just going stamps. Look, stamps.
For 25 years, they've been indispensable for over 1 million businesses. And you can get access to USPS and UPS services you need right from your computer anytime, day or night. No lines, no traffic, no waiting. Set up your business for success when you get started with stamps.com today. Sign up with promo code CHECK for a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus free postage and a free digital scale. No long-term commitments or contracts. Just go to stamps.com, click the microphone at the top of the page, and enter code CHECK.
They want us to shout out a member of our team, and basically we just shouted out how much we like stamps.com.
We do. It's good. Well,
We directed it back to
for stamps.com, which is good.
Yeah, tell me.
Stamps.com/check. Microphone, top of the page.
Microphone. Click the microphone.
You better do it.
Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
Anytime.
Buster Keaton. He's the son of Joseph Halley Keaton.
Yes.
Born 1867 in Terre Haute, Indiana. Did you know that, Dana? I bet you didn't.
I don't think I could have gotten his father's birth date. Shame on me.
Yeah, that is crazy that our researcher put his father's birthday in here. I briefly interpreted this as being Buster's, and I was like, wait, Buster Keaton was in his 50s when he was making fucking, he looks great.
Looked incredible. Yeah.
He died at age 99 in that case.
Right. And during the land rush of 1889, I mean, which the land rush, that's just when white people went west and had like one shotgun and would just sort of be like, these 200 acres,
mine.
Joe Keaton.
Yeah.
like, right? Like that's what the
Yeah,
land
I mean, the
rush
Oklahoma
basically is,
version of
right?
it was literally a particular day that was set, and people were just, it was like they were waiting to get into a show or something. They were just camped out around the perimeter waiting to go in and plant their flag.
It was right. It
Terrible
was trying to
country,
get Taylor
really.
Swift tickets without crashing Ticketmaster or whatever.
Right. Then, and Dana, honestly, you may know this stuff better than me, but he eventually ends up wanting to go to California in search of performance. Like he wants to perform, but he ends up back in Oklahoma, meets Myra Cutler, who is Buster's mother, right? And they start performing together. Like,
yeah, they joined a medicine show, basically. I mean, I feel like the key thing to realize
is a medicine
Yeah, baby,
show.
here we go.
I mean, basically, they were out in the prairie,
Yes.
right? And they
And there's not a
toured
lot to
around,
do.
probably in wagons. I don't think that trains were probably even extended across the country enough at that point that they were taking trains as
Right.
the three Keatons did later on. They were just going by wagon from town to town with various outfits. And the thing that's key to understand, I feel like, about his birth and early childhood is that it's not that he joined a performing family and was trained by the performing family. It's more that his parents were a failed vaudeville act,
Yeah,
or not
right.
even vaudeville, a failed medicine show touring act.
Yeah.
That was barely getting by because they had no real skills to offer. His dad was an acrobat,
Yes.
right?
So is the idea of a medicine show? It's like they do some jokes and then someone comes out and is like, "Buy this."
Yeah,
and,
they're
oh,
selling
right,
snake
right, right.
oil,
It's
yeah.
all
Right.
bam,
It
bundled
was
together. Right.
yeah. You have a sort of a traveling carriage, right? That's like performers
Right.
and salespeople.
Right, the tonics alongside the
Right.
whatever.
It
vaudeville.
was basically the primetime television of its day, where
Man.
it's like here's just a
And it must
collection
have
of
been
different.
so easy back then
Right.
because people had so many ailments, right?
Yes.
Like it was such hard life.
But look, that's what you watch Friends at 8 o'clock. They sell you blood pressure medication,
It's true.
and then Frasier starts or
It's
whatever.
true.
You know,
I can't
like
deny.
that's what it was. Like someone would come out and do a routine, and someone would come out and be like, "Baldness is a thing of the past," and then they like another guy would come out and do a backflip. Like that's what a medicine show was. It's so similar. Like the context of it feels wildly different because you're out in the middle of the plains and whatever, or in a small town. But it's very similar to how we absorb entertainment
It's
today.
true. Entertainment and advertising were intertwined right from the start of the 20th
Yes,
century.
and
Yeah.
such a fascinating thing you get into in your book is like when film is starting to develop and its actualities, it's like little newsreels. It's what I guess newsreels come later. But these very, very short subject things and Nickelodeons and all of that. All the reporting at the time of is like it's going to be bad for the young generation's brains to watch this much stuff this quickly.
Yeah, and the rhetoric really is exactly
It's
the same as
exactly
it
the
was
same as
about
TikTok.
television and the internet.
Yes,
Yeah, everything
right.
that's come since.
Right. Oh, these kids are just being overloaded with stimuli, and all this is like short form nonsense with no substance.
Well, because here's another date that's key to understand. Like 1867, we can dispense with in Terre Haute. But 1895 in
Yes.
Pequot, Kansas, when Buster Keaton is born, is
Yes.
also the year and just a couple months away from the date that movies are projected for the first time by
Yes.
the Lumiere brothers. And that's a fact that, comes up in every Keaton biography because it's a neat coincidence.
Right.
But
he
if you
was,
really think about
born
what that
as
means-
cinema was invented.
Right. They're
like,
born together.
concurrent.
But that also means they grow up together.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
And so
Right.
that means as he's traveling with these shows,
Yeah.
which when he joined the act at around age 5, start to become top line vaudeville shows in the best circuits.
Yeah.
They're showing movies with every show. And that's the first way most Americans saw movies. Right. So they went to see a guy, jump onto a bucket or whatever.
Is
and
that
then
what
at the
the
very
movie
end,
is?
there's a couple short 2-minute movies.
I love
Right.
a bucket act.
Yeah, I do like a guy who's just one bucket, and you're like,
I mean,
what's he gonna do with
What is
that?
it? And he can do so much with it.
Ben, you've been listening to the book, so you know this. David, do you know what Joe Keaton's senior big thing was?
I don't know.
He was a table act.
Oh, he would like do stuff.
The
with
man
the
with the table. He
The
billed
man with the
himself
table.
as.
His thing was
Sure.
like, you won't believe what you see me do with this fucking table.
And
he
they
had a little
hauled,
wooden
and they
table he
hauled
brought
the
out.
wood table around
Yeah.
the country.
He had the one table. It was like, oh fuck, he brought the table.
Now,
That's gonna be good.
as you alluded to already,
Yeah.
supposedly Buster gets his name because he fell down a flight of stairs, and somebody said, "That's sure a Buster," and Buster would often claim Harry Houdini had said this.
Some
right?
version of this definitely happened, and there's debate as to when it happened, to in front of which person who coined the term or whatever. Basically, the kid falls down a flight of stairs. He has no reaction. He doesn't seem injured. He gets back up.
Right.
And some adult
sure a
friends
Buster.
of his parents said, "Wow, that kid can really take
He's
a
a
buster,
regular Buster.
or he's a little buster, or what a buster, or something like that," and it kind of sticks. But key point, as you bring up, Dana, Buster is kind of this anti-Nepo kid. And it's this thing that I think in this exhausting discourse that's happening now doesn't get discussed as much, which is like the amount of children who are the amount of, let's say, stage kids who are the children of like failed showbiz people who like committed their whole career to it and spent their entire lives kind of at the margins. And there's some X factor missing. There's
It's like, what if Salieri was Mozart's dad?
Correct. And there's like a ton of that, and still is to this day. But he has this father who had all the ambition, and it never totally connected. Whether there was some element of him that was unlikable, there was some self-destructive strain in him. There was some lack of ingenuity or charisma or whatever it is, or all of it combined.
He was really a better pitchman than anything else, which came in
Yeah.
really handy when he had a performing prodigy for a son.
But a guy who on paper is like, he certainly he learned every type of act. He had all the experience. He had
Right.
the skill
He
set.
knew a ton of people too.
Yep.
It seems like he
Yeah,
like,
because
from
Harry
being on
Houdini
the
was a good
circuit.
friend, and
He
he
was-
definitely was
Right.
a
He's not
social
making
guy.
up the Harry Houdini out of whole cloth.
He was
His
at the
parents
center of
traveled with
all of it.
Houdini for a while, yeah, for sure.
But it's like when you read biographies about, sort of artists when there are movements, right, where 6 people come up in the same wave. And you're like, well, 5 of those guys became totemic figures in society. Who's this fucking 6th guy who's in 12 chapters but never did anything of importance? And you're like, there's just always sort of that guy in the group who is in the right place, doing the right work with the right people, and just it never totally connected in the same way.
Right.
This kid falls down a flight of stairs and immediately is funny than anything he's ever done. Like, it is, not to reduce it, but it is
No,
like
sure.
they just immediately realize, like, oh, this kid's the fucking juice.
That was actually the thing that surprised me most in research, I think, is that, I'd read a lot of biographies of him by that time. I knew
Yeah.
he was a child star. He wasn't just a child performer. He was like the reason you went to see the act,
He
right?
became the act.
But like
Yeah.
when you trace in the press of the time how quickly that happened, that
Yes.
was what really boggled me, is that he first performs, really on stage with them in any way other than just coming out to be cute for a minute or
Right.
something when he had just turned 5.
Right.
And 6 months later, he's being billed as, they don't even mention the parents' names.
Yes.
They say the 3 Keatons starring Buster. And he's the one who gets the little write-up about, and he's being talked about by, vaudeville critics, whatever those were, because that's sort of in between pitchman and critic in those days, right? But people were genuinely wowed by the performance of this 5.5-year-old kid. And by the time he's 6 years old, like 1 year into performing, they've gone from, the Mohawk Indian medicine show in Kansas to like Pastors and Keith's and the Orpheum and the
Yeah.
big vaudeville circuits.
Right.
And you talk about this in your book, but he was such a sensation that he was the subject of the sort of stars, they're just like us pieces. You have pieces about Buster in like single digit years about like, he's a normal kid. He plays with his train sets. He's just a happy little kid.
Right. He might get on stage, but other than that, he's just like you.
Well,
Sure.
and it was this weird, like, A, the public was so obsessed with him, they wanted to know more about him. But B, Joe Sr. needed to really sell in order for the act to continue to grow. He is not damaged by this at all.
Right. Well, one of their taglines was the boy who couldn't be
Right.
damaged. The boy who
little
can't be
boy
damaged.
who can't be damaged.
Right.
Which,
that
that
is
is-
very much like my shirt about my boy who can't be damaged answers a lot of the questions.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so like this is not a flash fast forward to his midlife. Not at all.
Right.
He can't be damaged. It's easy. Throw him against the wall. See, he's fine.
But it
The
was
human mop, apparently another
that
word,
was a
another
big
nickname.
routine.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
yeah. So there was
A lot of rough housing, it seems like, was the
Right.
the act.
well, even in these early years, there was starting to be the conversation of like, is this inhumane to make kids be part of acts like this?
I would say also that is the era when the sort of Jacob Riis era where like humanity is starting to think like, should children work?
Yeah.
I mean, we've been letting them do it, but
Right.
is
Yeah,
this
you know,
wrong
child
for
labor
them?
laws
Right,
and
yeah.
child abuse laws and all that
Right.
stuff. Well, this is in the book, so you know already. But
Yes.
it was almost completely contiguous with that. Maybe a generation before, but that means that Buster's was the first generation to actually be impacted by the reforms because they were
Basically-
written into law.
Pushed
Yes.
pushed along by the grandson of the man who invented gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, Elbridge Gerry, who
Yes.
started
Oh,
who
sure.
started this child labor movement, was a lawyer and a kind of progressive reformer.
Right,
Yeah,
grandson of the
great
founding
grandson of a
father.
former
Yeah.
vice president.
Elbridge Gerry, yeah, he was the
For
first
whom
president.
gerrymandering, I believe it's
No, I'm
pronounced
talking about
Gary,
his-
actually, but
Yes, sorry.
Right, the Gerry family.
but nobody says gerrymandering, so we've just kind of
Right, I think
back
they're-
formation.
You're right. It's Gary.
But
Yeah, I mean-
his grandson is the one who really starts pushing this child
Yes.
labor thing as kids are becoming a bigger part of acts.
There's some playground down by the Manhattan Bridge that's a very early playground. And I read some story about it once, and it was like they were like, kids need somewhere to blow off after like all the work they do
Yeah.
at the factory. Like that's when they were building those things.
Basically,
And that's also when cars were coming about, right? So kids were getting crushed by cars constantly. I mean, if you
Yes.
read about like the situation of children at the turn of the 20th century, it's
Mhm.
nuts how much it changed in about 20 years.
and look, as
We
as-
never should have had cars. We really should have put a
No,
stop to
I've been
that.
saying this
I
forever.
know, it really is crazy.
I'm on the record as
that
always
they were
saying
just
this.
like, running around smashing into people. And we
The
were
only
like, oh, no, we'll
cars
figure
I
this
trust
out.
have big eyes and tongues and say ka-chow. And those are the only cars that should exist. They should exist safely within screens.
I feel like people were encouraged to drink while driving, right? Like
Like,
you're
this is
supposed
fun.
to be intoxicated.
You were supposed to drink gasoline and pour alcohol into the tank.
Yeah,
and that was
exactly.
the ideal way to take to the road. The human mop thing, David,
Yeah.
was sort of Joe Sr. for years was constantly trying to find ways to skirt around legally having Buster be part of the show.
Uh-huh.
So it was like, it's illegal for kids to do acrobat acts. And he's like, cool, my kid's not an acrobat. He's a prop.
Right, he's a mop.
I put a
Right,
fucking
yeah.
mop on him and I hold him by his feet and I mop the floor with him. And then he would just get bigger laughs as a mop than anything his dad was doing.
Yeah, so wow, he would just constantly be upstaging his jealous dad.
Oh, and the upstaging was part of the act as well.
right.
The
Right.
whole
They built it
fucking
in, right.
key to the thing was Joe would bring Buster out as the like, I'm gonna now offer an instructional to parents on how to rear your child.
Right.
And he'd be downstage where you couldn't
Yes.
see the kid, right?
It was the whole bit is that he's looking at the back of Buster's head from the audience's view. And he's going, I'm going to make example of this kid. I'm going to show you how to lay down the law with children. And Buster would always get the better of him. Joe would be oblivious to what was happening until it was too late. And at some early point, they realize when Buster sort of does the full Bugs Bunny, ain't I a stinker, sort of wagging his eyebrows at the audience and grinning, the audience gets a little turned off. It becomes a little too sadistic, a little
Yes.
too Clifford, a little
So
too
that's how
problem child.
he has to be stone-faced.
Right. And then the first time he's stone-faced when it's happening, and I think that largely comes out of when they're doing the mop act and the things like that, where he's supposed to be,
Right.
less present, less alive.
Kind of a passive object, which happens in so many of his movies too,
Yes.
right? It's somebody else besides his dad,
Yes.
usually, but he's constantly being sort of treated as a projectile.
Anytime they do that to him on stage, the audience laughs twice as much. So his dad, they start to get into the routine of his dad just yelling, face, face, face.
Right, right.
If he feels like he's starting to laugh or he's starting to enjoy it, that the dynamic is the dad always thinks that he's going to punish the kid's somehow going to get the better of the dad, and the kid never seems to enjoy it. He's unreadable.
Here's the Buster quote. The law read that a child can't do acrobatics, can't walk a wire, can't juggle, a lot of those things, but there's nothing said in the law. You can't kick him in the face or throw him through a piece of scenery. It feels like some Air Bud logic of like, no one wrote that down, but
Right.
I don't know. Feels like that's a given that you shouldn't throw children through scenery.
Well, they kept on like
Yeah,
trying to like
yeah,
tighten
yeah.
the lines, and then Joe would
The
find
technical.
another space.
And then like the
between
mayor
words
would
to-
show up again and be like, I told you to stop doing this. And,
And it got
But
to-
then, you know what?
What?
Sorry to interrupt you,
No,
Griffin.
no, please.
You know, in his movies, that same dynamic is happening constantly, right? Where
Yes.
the audience is kind of on a seesaw in between laughing and gasping, right? And you even see it in Our Hospitality, the big rescue. You know, he
Yes.
always builds to some moment where danger and comedy kind of meet. You know,
This is
Right.
why all of this is so important, not just as context for how he gets to the point where he's making movies, but how his persona is honed.
it's also pretty interesting.
It's interesting. But his persona is not something that's like designed in a lab of like how to make a relatable character, you know? It's like this weird push and pull over like 2 decades of him trying out different things and landing in this odd space.
Can I say one of the other acts that I love that you talk about in the book is when Ira is the mother's name?
Myra.
Myra. She's
Be great if her name
upstage
was Ira.
playing saxophone.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And dad is using a straight razor,
Mm.
shaving. Okay?
Okay.
And Buster is then walking on stage swinging a basketball on a string.
A basketball? Oh,
Yes.
Okay. Right.
Basketball,
right.
big part of Buster's act as a kid.
Okay.
It was like
Like
the
an
one-
old-fashioned basketball, obviously.
The
one of those-
basketball
yeah,
was
yeah,
like
yeah.
his rosebud. It was like the one nice present he got for being a good boy, and then they worked it into the act a lot.
Right.
basketball and a table. That's all you
Yes.
need for
It was all-
comedy.
But like that's what I'm saying. Like that was their act. It
Yeah.
was she was playing saxophone.
Right.
He was shaving.
Right.
And the audience is being like, "Oh, he's gonna cut his throat."
Right,
yeah,
with
sure,
this
sure,
spinning
there's tension
basketball on a
here.
rope. It's so
Right.
bizarre.
But,
Like,
yeah,
this
no one's
domestic
saying-
But
scenario.
relatable.
Yeah,
It's something
totally.
for everyone.
Totally.
But-
You don't like to shave? Well, then you must love the sex.
Here's another thing that will be so key for the rest of his career in terms of how his sensibility and comedy is set up is that the tension, right?
Yes.
Clearly setting up
Yes.
the
Like
stakes,
Dana
the
State.
tension.
Right.
How
Right,
could
right,
things
right.
go wrong here? Because he's not someone who's trying to there's the quote here that you can easily poke holes in. I don't know if we can pull up the exact verbatim one, but in what is it? My Life in Slapstick, which is the autobiography.
My Wonderful World of Slapstick. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. That is him sort of as told to telling his life story in his later years. And Buster tried to define the difference between him and Chaplin and their screen personas, the tramp versus the sort of Buster in quotes persona. And his thing he said was the tramp is always trying to like get away with something. The tramp is always sort of trying to pull one over. He's trying to avoid working. He's trying to get ahead. He knows what he's doing, and Buster's kind of oblivious, right? There's an innocence to Buster swinging a basketball around his head on a rope, even as that seems an absurd thing to do. It's his magic as a performer as he's able to convey that he genuinely doesn't understand that's a dangerous act.
Right.
And it's so much about setting up, well, okay, you're swinging a basketball and there's a guy here with a razor. I know the ways in which this could go wrong. And so often the magic in a Buster movie is somehow it goes
Buster, right? Yeah, and then it figures itself out.
It figures itself out in a way that feels like this guy is somehow rewriting the laws of logic and physics and time around him just by existing. But yes, all this stuff, playing with the ball, fucking with his parents. It is this weird, uncomfortable balance of like Joe Sr., a piece of work, an alcoholic, an angry man. But Buster genuinely seemed to take to these things, even though he was working in a way that no child should work. This was not by any accounts a case where they were like drilling stuff into him in a way that was abusive. Him being in this environment was obviously fairly abusive to begin with, but there was this weird X factor of he genuinely seemed to avoid injury. Many times they would go to a town.
They would get like get him inspected,
right?
Or like,
right.
Like
the mayor, the governor, the senator would be like, "We're gonna be the fucking people to finally shut this act down. We're gonna fucking open up the books and realize every bone in this kid's body is broken." And they'd look at him, they'd be like, "Seems happy, body fine." It was
that indestructible quality, right?
Yeah. Massachusetts thought I was a midget. Buster Keaton says at one point. So I guess they thought he was like, a man pretending to be a child.
Yes.
Eventually in 1907.
But the more they try to prove and fail, the more his star increases.
Sure, right,
because it's like, this sort of feels like cruelty-free entertainment to the masses of like, I don't know, I just read in the paper that this kid's happy.
Right. Well, but in 1907, when he's about 12, they get served with warrants in New York City, and like he's barred from performing until he's 16.
Only in New York State, though.
Only in New York.
Because of state law.
But because New York was the center of vaudeville, they have to then switch things up and start touring. Is that sort of what happens there?
No, they were always touring. I mean, that's what vaudeville was. But it's just that New York was the most lucrative. And So that was a tough 2 years for them where they had to stay out of New York.
He's growing up. So like the kid thing is getting less and less.
He's going through the classic, is this still funny anymore? Are we finding him cute anymore? He's having to like figure out how to evolve the persona a bit.
The dad also started drinking a lot more in that era. So yeah, there's this period in his teens where the act was in transition. It started to get some negative reviews, although he continued. It seems like Keaton continued to sort of charm his way out of it, but his dad was becoming less functional, both as a father and as a performer.
Yeah, and the critics were going like, well, this is still funny, but are we like a year away from this getting old?
It feels like it starts to become more Homer versus Bart Simpson.
Yes.
Right? Where like he's choking Bart, and they're
there's
like
a scary
more aggressive
part to it. Yes, where like how real is this?
Right, and Buster would say like, "Oh, we start the show. I smell the whiskey from across the stage. I know this is going to be a bad one." You know, it's suddenly everything got more hostile, more tense.
1916 seems to be when they finally abandoned the dad.
Yes,
in California.
Yeah, this is such a biopic moment, right? It's impossible not to imagine the drama of that moment because it's the moment that, he and his mother basically, because the mom asks him, Myra asks Buster on a train.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, can't you see this scene? Like they're on a train going to their next gig, and she basically says, I can't take it anymore because the father's become abusive. You know, he's drinking all the time. He has two younger siblings at this point who are totally dependent on the income that Buster is bringing in.
Well, this is right. This other wild dynamic is that Buster is the breadwinner of the family. Meanwhile, his two siblings are being raised in a indescribably more normal childhood
Right.
because they now have means.
They're like at a boarding school.
They have creature comforts.
Mhm.
They're getting education.
Yeah.
Buster never went to school. At one point, they
They
said,
sent him to school for one day once.
right. There was this
yes.
idea of
He went
like,
to school for Hard Knocks.
hey,
Well, that's true.
there was this idea that like Ben, you will like this, that like, well, if we're touring, maybe when we're in the town, send him to school during the day before the night of the show. He'll pop in for a day, he'll sit in on classes or whatever. And he goes to one class, one school the first time they try this out. And he had these routines so like baked into his brains and had to both participate in and watch so many acts that were based around like kids misbehaving in school
Mhm.
that anything the teacher said to him, said to the class, any question posed, he had like a snappy comeback to. He had like a fucking one-liner to the point where within 45 minutes, she was like, get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
You're
Which is
never
something
going
that
to
you
school.
don't think of, that he was actually a verbal comic in those
Yes.
days, right?
Right.
Like you go crazy trying to think, because the act was never filmed, of course, right?
Right.
Like most vaudeville acts weren't. It's like it changed all the time. A lot of it really was based on things like vocal impressions, songs,
Ben was asking me this.
snappy
Right.
comebacks, like you say. So even though we think of him as the ultimate pantomimist and the guy who never speaks, there was actually a big verbal and
He
sung
could
element.
sell one-liners.
Is that why silent films obviously were silent films and they were successful?
Mhm.
But when they were starting to bring in sound, people were like, well, this will never work. Would they just kind of like, because I'll just go see a show if I want to hear comedy or whatever. Is that why? Because like when you now learn of like during the transition to sound, the people were like, psh, fad.
Mhm.
That
Well,
seems crazy.
people in the industry were like Louis B. Mayer thought that,
Right.
Irving Thalberg thought that, but audiences loved sound.
I know
right
they
from the
loved it,
beginning.
but it's just weird that anyone would think like, well, no one's going to want to be able to hear anything.
Doesn't
like,
that happen basically
I
every
guess so.
single
It just
time?
seems weird that
Of
they-
course.
You mean every time there's a technological
Yeah,
change?
that there's
Yeah,
some
any
like,
stylistic
shift in the
change.
medium. Yes,
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's not what people
But like,
actually want.
do you, like,
Yeah.
would Louis B. Mayer be sitting there being like, if people wanted to hear Buster Keaton talk, they could go see him talk. Like they could hear that on a stage. Like that's what the stage is for, and the films.
Not only
are
that, but
for
you
this,
have
and-
radio stars. Like
Right, you have radio,
Ben and I, we had a walk around the circumference of Central Park after watching Sherlock, and he was sort of asking
we
me
ate a
about
hot dog,
we ate
which
hot
felt
dogs.
very
very,
depression
yeah, that's
era.
very early
Got a
20th century.
Coney Island and knee high, and we talked about vaudeville. But Ben was asking me, like, so he was verbal. So he like knew how to do verbal gags. And I was like, yeah, he did. And it's interesting watching both Three Ages and Hospitality. Three Ages in particular, his characters talk a lot more than they do in the later films. Even if you're not throwing up intertitles to show his dialogue, in the later films, you rarely even see him open his mouth. The character is portrayed as being more silent in his day-to-day life rather than you, the audience, aren't hearing him.
And I think that's really him discovering himself,
Doesn't need it. It's funnier if this character is sort of a mystery to the people around him as well, not just the audience. But like, yeah, we were saying in the 30s when he's at MGM, they try to pair him up with Jimmy Durante, who's like the exact opposite of who he is as a performer in so many ways. And it's like these guys are both megastars, but they're coming from different tracks at that point. And Durante's someone who's like incredibly famous, but from the radio.
He's got the schnoz, right?
They're
That
like,
was his
this
whole
guy's
thing.
got a funny look and he can say things and sing songs and whatever. But like, he's not a physical comedian. He's a funny presence.
The idea of them in a buddy comedy does not work at all. It's so
No.
wrong, and they kept on doing it over and over again. It's like mashing, two Barbies together.
Right,
or
like peanut
something.
butter and pickles
I
or
find
whatever.
them
yeah.
interesting, but they're odd to watch. And you're like, Buster knows how to sell a verbal gag better than Durante knows how to do a physical gag, but it still feels incorrect to watch them do it. David,
What?
you like games?
Yes.
You do. Don't
I
get
love
ahead of
games.
me
I
here.
love games. Let's barrel through.
You like video games?
Yeah. Bored.
Yeah, here, but
Mind?
not BORED, to quote Norm Macdonald. You like games that keep you engaged, right?
Yeah.
Let me describe a game you would hate.
Okay.
A game where no one wins.
You're talking about the waiting
I'm
game.
talking about the waiting game. When it
Because
comes to hiring,
Ah.
what were you going to say? I didn't want to wait for you to say it.
Well, you just can't wait for
No,
great talent to find
can't.
you. You got to find them first with Indeed.
Yeah. When you're hiring, you need Indeed because Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire. AIH, as I always say, all in one place. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites searching for candidates with the right skills, Indeed's a powerful hiring platform that can help you do it all. This is what they do. David, tell them what they do.
Streamline hiring, powerful tools that help you find match candidates.
That's what they do.
They've got this service, Instant Match. 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job.
I love it.
According to Indeed US. And it makes hiring in one place really easy because candidates, like say, you're using Indeed, candidates you invite to apply are 3 times more likely to apply to a job than one they can only see in search.
David, that is just one of the many things I love about Indeed.
They show you candidates whose resumes on Indeed fit your job description immediately after you post. So you can hire faster, and it matches you with the quality candidates instantly. And you only pay for applications that meet your must-have requirements.
Even better in my eyes. Look, Indeed is an unbelievably powerful hiring platform delivering 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest 2019. So here's what I think you should do. I think you should join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. David, I demand that you do a call to action.
Okay, great. Start hiring now with $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/check. Offer good for a limited time. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/check. Indeed.com/check. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. You need Indeed.
Bye. But yes, the shift is happening. Is starting to happen. Where are we in the context?
Yeah, well, so, right. At this point, eventually
he breaks up the act,
goes back
1916.
To New York. The act is broken up. His mom goes to Detroit, it sounds like. That's where she settles.
I mean, his parents ended up basically following him around for the rest of his life. Like, this is a crazy thing about the 3 Keatons, or the 5 Keatons, including his siblings, is that they never really stopped living at least very close to each other, if not actually in the same house.
No, I mean, Joe Senior's obviously in our hospitality.
Joe Schenk, a booking manager for Marcus Lowe, who was early in whatever the Keaton. You must know this, Dan. I hate reading this.
Okay, well, I can set up who Joe Schenk is, because he's a huge character in Buster's life. He was a mogul, right?
Yes,
one of the many Jewish movie moguls who came from another industry, which in his case was the amusement park industry, right? Yes. Makes complete sense that would sort of flow into, Nickelodeon's theater, movie productions, etc. And he becomes an independent producer who, for all of those golden years that we're talking about of the 1920s, is underwriting Buster's movies. He's funding his production company, the Buster Keaton Productions. And he is also, importantly, Buster Keaton's brother-in-law, because Keaton's not married yet, but when he marries, he will marry the sister of the Talmadge sisters, who were 2 big silent movie stars, Norma and Constance Talmadge.
Who is the female lead in Our Hospitality, her final acting role ever.
Yeah, not really an actress.
No.
He was also producing Fatty Arbuckle shorts at this time, right? Like he's the one who thinks to put Keaton and Arbuckle together.
It's such a fascinating thing where you're like, once again, you think about the confluence of all these things happening, right? He's sort of hitting developmental ages where he's going to need to figure out how his persona changes if he's no longer the little kid, right? He's starting to mature. Then also they're leaving Joe.
So he needs to become a solo act.
He needs to figure out who he is comedically outside of that
and
specific
movies
dynamic.
Are coming in. So,
and also, Joe is no longer steering his career. So it's like he's got to make choices. He's got to figure out who he is in a changing body and who he is removed from the context of this other comedic figure.
Yeah.
And movies are coming up. Schenk is the one who goes like, you should meet Arbuckle.
Roscoe.
Right.
Right.
And basically, like, just sends him to go visit the set. Right?
Yeah. I mean, it was actually a guy he knew from vaudeville that sent him there. But yeah, Joe Schenk was sort of the connector between the 2 of them. And that's another biopic moment for me.
Is that the vaudeville guy? I don't know. There's various people who are credited for maybe nudging them all.
But it makes complete sense because, he was a star in vaudeville. Arbuckle's a star in movies. They obviously knew each other's work, right? Yep. And so it's just the moment where their paths cross. And it's another great biopic scene, right? That's the chapter about pancakes in the book.
Yes.
Because Keaton remembers in that same As Told To memoir that the morning of the day he met Arbuckle, which changed his life and brought him from the stage to the screen, he stopped for pancakes at this chain pancake restaurant, which, sent me down a whole rabbit hole of like, what was it to go out for pancakes in 1917?
I could do with pancakes. I want some pancakes.
It was the big thing. Yeah.
Sure.
What's the name of the chain again?
The Child's Restaurant chain.
But their whole thing was like any type of pancake you want.
It just looks
buckwheat.
so appealing from the old
Yeah.
photos. Just a white tiled room where you
Yeah.
can get all the pancakes you want.
Incredible. But yeah, it's Roscoe like opens up the camera and he immediately sees in this guy not just that he's obviously like he respects his work as a comedian, but he sees how Buster kind of like lights up at being on set and realizing
Right.
like, oh, this is a whole other fucking medium with a lot of new possibility. And so Roscoe immediately sort of goes like, here's the camera. Here's how this works. Here's what you can do with it. Immediately takes him under his wing. And Buster, who I think was thought like, let's get him in there as a performer. Let's maybe have him help write gags, is also now getting really into the technology of the thing and very quickly
But-
sort of unofficially becomes assistant director.
Right, and passes
the shorts
on
and co-stars.
certain sort of tenets, like he doesn't really use a script, right?
Yeah.
Arbuckle, neither did Keaton.
Yeah.
Really, he didn't like write down a script
Right.
until the MGM era.
Mhm.
And also Arbuckle is like, just shoot lots and lots of footage, and you will like edit it into the best parts.
Yeah.
Which I guess was not totally typical at the time. I don't know. Like, this is being presented to me in this research dossier.
I didn't know
As-
that Arbuckle was known for having a huge shooting ratio,
That
actually.
he was like shooting over abundance of footage, and Keaton would do that too, right? Like,
I
pick the
guess by
best stuff.
Senate standards, right? Arbuckle was coming from the Max Sennett Keystone studio where they were such
Just like-
cheapskates. Yeah,
Yes.
they were
Yeah,
just getting
yeah.
it done fast.
Right. And
So
a lot of-
Arbuckle was quite artful, really, for somebody making movies in
I've
1917.
really never seen much Fatty Arbuckle stuff. Like, I mean, this is not
That stuff, if you want to talk about being a completist, it's very easy to tack on the 14 shorts they made together, and they're really, really interesting to
we'll
see.
discuss
They are-
at least some of them. or,
Yeah,
a couple
I
of
think
them,
we should throw one maybe into the Patreon episode, which we'll discuss May 11th. But they're all right now at the time we're recording this. Criterion has their series, and there's a sub series called Buster's Beginnings that contains, I believe they have all 4
Mhm.
of the Arbuckle Keaton shorts. And it's right, yeah, because like Keaton is figuring out his comedic persona, but in shorts that are not being driven by him.
Right. So you get to see him do things that he would never do in his own movies,
Yes.
like cry,
Sure.
laugh, play various characters. He didn't really have that set character yet. Sometimes he had the pork pie hat, he usually had the deadpan, but
Right.
he really is just a utility player who's doing whatever he needs to do
What
in his
is
company.
Fatty Arbuckle's thing? Like, apart from being a big garrulous man, like, what is his on-screen persona like?
How would you describe it? I mean,
Yeah, it's funny.
it's not what you would expect at all.
No.
He's extremely sweet.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because he's
Right.
associated with this scandal, which we can get to later on,
Sure,
like
yes.
Right.
I think maybe people would think that he has some of that Chaplin kind of raunchy side, the way
Right.
Chaplin was always sort of like, waggling his eyebrows at the ladies or
There's
something.
there's a lecherous quality that is not there.
He's almost
Right.
like a children's entertainer.
But
There's
maybe
a-
that's why it
yes.
was even more shocking to the public, right? When he was then in this sex scandal.
There's
right.
something very childlike about him without him seeming dumb or
Right.
infantile,
He's a nice boy.
He's very gender bending, and there's a lot
Yes.
about this in the book too. Like he wore drag wonderfully. He had this
Mm.
character Miss Fatty,
Right.
and when he became Miss Fatty, it was there was no misogyny in it at all. There's some scenes where he, as Miss Fatty, flirts with Buster,
Right.
mainly in Goodnight Nurse, which I think is the funniest short they made together.
I watched Goodnight Nurse.
Isn't it so good?
Yeah, he's covered in like blood. Buster.
Oh yeah,
like,
there's
as the
tons of dark
person
humor,
who
gory
works at the
humor in it.
hospital.
Yeah.
His smock is like covered in blood. But they have this whole drawn out thing where they're like each flirting with each other.
Yeah.
And it goes on for so long in a way where I'm like, this bit is very like modern. Like I could see someone doing
Right,
an
the fact
improv
that it takes
scene
so
like
long.
this.
Sure,
and just like
It was
having
an
go
improv scene,
on
really.
and on and
They were
on.
ad libbing it, and a fun thing about that scene is you can see Buster trying not to crack up,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's really clear that they're friends, that they had a very strong off-screen friendship at that time, and mentorship. So that short is great for that reason too.
But it's once again very similar to Bugs Bunny, where the joke becomes, it goes from being, oh, he's going to put on a dress and pretend to be a woman to get the better of someone or whatever, right? And then the joke quickly becomes, oh, he's like really in this. The joke is that there's no joke anymore. The joke is that he's not doing it mockingly, that
right.
it's not just a trick, that it's like such a full transformation. But I do think to some extent, Arbuckle's persona was maybe more malleable than, when Lloyd, Keaton, and Chaplin come and all have such clearly defined, this is what my movie star persona is. Arbuckle was at such an early stage that just being funny on screen was enough to give you a reputation rather than necessarily needing a continuity of here is the classically defined Arbuckle leading role.
Yeah, maybe he had less of a character, but he had a lot
which
of
is
the
a
skills
very
Keaton did.
great
Like he was a really
Yeah.
good mover,
Yes.
right? Especially for a huge guy like he was, right?
Yeah.
Like for his girth,
Right.
he's really light on his feet. He could do
Yes.
falls, he could dance.
There's a lot of
He
the
had
Chris
incredible
Farley thing
aim. He
there.
has a lot of
Yeah.
funny jokes about like throwing a hatchet behind him without looking and it lands in the center of a target or something. He
Yeah.
was really good at weird sleight of hand things like
I
that.
think he was more just kind of a great performer than he was like the clearly defined type.
I mean, you have to ask what would have happened if not for the scandal and if
Yeah.
his career had continued on through the 20s. You know, he could have completely redefined
Right.
who
might
he
have found
was.
a new persona.
It
Or
was the other
whatever.
thing you talk a lot about in your book, but he hated the fatty name.
Sure, I mean, one might not want to be called fatty
Of
all the
course.
time, but people called him Roscoe
Yes.
to his face or whatever. Like he was professionally.
But it was
Roscoe,
one of
right,
those
yeah.
things where like that probably was the handle that made him a star.
Of course, sure.
It was sort of a gilded cage kind
And
of
it was in the
thing.
title often. You know, a
Right.
lot of his Keystone movies were, Fatty's Tin Type Tangle and
Right.
Fatty's Magic Pants was
Right.
a great
Ooh,
title.
If
of
we
one of
have
them.
to-
It sounds
if-
pretty good.
If we have to sell the fatty in order for me to be a movie star,
Sure,
then I
I'll
guess that's
take
where
it.
I'm stuck.
But it's
My
sucks,
persona is
right.
not based in me being fat, though. It's not like Fatty Arbuckle shorts are about him like getting
think
waylaid by
he was-
No,
sandwiches.
they don't. He didn't really do weight jokes. And I
No.
mean, this is actually a thing I try to do in the book is like reinvent him as Roscoe.
Yes.
I feel like great injustice. Well, the greatest injustice that's been done him is that he's vaguely remembered as this kind of pervy rapist and murderer,
right.
right? Which not only did he not commit those acts, but it seems like from everything we know now about this woman who died at a party that he threw in 1921, no one was raped or murdered.
No.
Right.
Right? I mean, there was,
It
someone who
so
died
much of it was
for
like
all kinds
Randall
of
Hearst,
Right.
like weird yellow journalism
Yeah,
stuff. Right.
tabloid-
Yeah.
I mean, a kangaroo court situation. Just, I'm not an expert on all of this, but it's pretty evident that like there were no crimes committed except for
Yes.
maybe a bunch of drunk people not taking enough care with somebody who was falling down drunk at a party.
But to reduce it greatly, it felt like the core of the thing was there was this growing moral panic around the movies and the shifting, like, sort of, are they lowering the public morals?
I feel like this is less true.
We
of
need
the
a
movies.
scapegoat to punish.
Right. Well, the less true of the movies we are going to cover. Because I feel like Buster Keaton movies are fairly chaste and lovely.
His character is very
Yes.
chaste.
But like,
yeah.
you watch some of these movies from the 20s and it is kind of crazy how scandalous they feel.
Yes.
Like, and how like loose the whole sort of morality of them is. Not just like what they're showing you, but just how
Right.
everyone's behaving.
And the papers are already
It's-
complaining about the fact that these kids are having their brain rotted at the Nickelodeon.
Right.
God forbid they throw a nickel down and watch a thing that's 45
Right.
seconds long.
Rather than shovel more coal or
Right.
whatever they're supposed
So
to be
then when
doing.
on top of that, the movies are kind of bawdy, and then you hear that the private lives of these
Right.
people who are becoming celebrities and being written about are kind of bawdy, they're like, we need to stop this whole fucking chain.
I mean,
So if a woman ends up dead at a Roscoe Arbuckle party, then someone has to pay for this.
you hated Babylon, right?
yeah, unfortunately,
But
I
obviously
went in
Babylon is
with such a
about
good heart.
the-
Yeah.
The wildness of that time.
I mean, part of I think why I was so disappointed is I had just spent 5 years reading about all that stuff, so I
Yes.
couldn't wait to see how Chazelle treated it, and
Right.
the fact he played so fast and loose with so many things was just it's not even about accuracy, it's just all the lost opportunities of how much more
Yes.
interesting the real thing was.
Yeah, I like
doing
that
his thing.
movie, but that movie is very disconnected from reality,
Yeah.
other than in like humongous broad strokes.
Very, very broad. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So Buster Keaton, okay, so he's working with Fatty Arbuckle. Like you say, he's sort of assistant directing as well as being on screen. He's learning the trade. He was drafted and served in World War I, but he
Mhm.
didn't
He was an
fight.
entertainer. Yeah.
Right. He got an ear infection, apparently.
That wasn't why I think he just got in so late that the armistice had
he
almost,
says,
had almost
right,
been signed.
like by the
yeah.
time I was going to be at the front, it was over. Right.
If you like go to war, if you get drafted and then you get something like an ear infection, do you still get a Purple Heart
You do not get a Purple Heart for getting an ear infection, but you would
get
get
like
like a service medal.
or like a purple ear?
You get a purple lollipop.
Yeah. I just think if you have an injury that is unrelated to combat, but it happens when you've been drafted,
Do you want to know a Purple Heart fact that I know that's so crazy?
please.
I think I may have learned it on a podcast. When the U.S. was preparing to invade Japan, the island of Japan, as part of the end of World War II, we minted like so many Purple Hearts, preparing for what that was going to be. Right, like this really awful,
Like Iwo Jima and stuff. Right.
post like where we were getting ready for what we assumed before we dropped the bomb, what
Mhm.
we assumed would be like a very grueling campaign on the actual mainland. And we still use those Purple Hearts that they minted. We have not depleted the
That's
supply.
Wild.
They minted like 250,000 or something. And we have not depleted that supply. So if you get a Purple Heart, it's from 1945.
I mean, I guess that's good news in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, none of it's good, but yeah, it's just crazy.
There was some point in the last couple of years where I was spiraling about any number of things.
Sounds
Maybe
fun.
it was when the stuff was starting to go down in the Ukraine, or any of the numerous times we've been worried about nuclear retaliation from countries who were being mocked on Twitter.
Sure.
And you were like, what are you so stressed out about? And I was like, I don't want a world war. I don't want to get drafted. And you were like, Griffin, you're too old to be drafted.
Yeah, you're not on their list.
It is such a bone-deep anxiety of mine that I did not clock until like 2 years ago, where you're up like, oh, right, I'm like wasted. I'm like a fucking bird
They
out
don't want
husk.
you. They want all those kids on like TikTok or whatever.
Right.
Like those kids get drafted.
First of all,
right?
everything with my body is wrong. But
Yeah,
even still,
right.
I was like, I'm young. And you were like, hey, hot news, buddy. You're no longer eligible for American Idol, and you wouldn't get drafted in the war. You're not so young anymore.
Oh wow, what's the ceiling?
The
on
upside of
American Idol?
aging, no longer
Yeah,
cannon fodder.
I know. American Idol's like 28 or 29.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay.
No
all right,
longer
we
can't
should move
find
along. So the first film to star Buster Keaton apparently is The Saphead.
Yes.
An adaptation of a Winchell Smith play.
So this is the one that he just gets cast in. It's
Right.
a Winchell Smith play that Douglas Fairbanks had done a loose adaptation of, but always wanted to do a more literal, faithful adaptation of the play. And then as the time goes on, they kick him out of it. They put Buster in the sort of second role, and Buster just steals the movie so much that it kind of becomes a Buster Keaton film. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's
to
a
say?
weird film to watch because it's really pretty much a dramatic role, right? A
Yes.
supporting dramatic role, even. But because
he's doing the deadpan thing.
yeah,
though,
because his
right,
deadpan is so pronounced, and he's making such choices, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's making such strong choices that it really stands out. He only gets to do a wee bit of physical comedy at the end, but it's great. The stock floor scene.
To make a semi-modern comparison point, it's maybe a little similar to something like 48 Hours, where it's like Eddie Murphy gets slotted into this movie.
He is a supporting character in
Right.
48 Hours.
And
but,
then
like, you
everyone's
think of him
like,
as the
you know
lead.
what? Whatever this guy's doing,
Right.
that's what the movie is now.
Right.
And there's the structure of this movie around him. He is not the main creative force, but everything starts bending to like, well, this is obviously where the juice is.
So while he's making The Saphead,
Mhm.
Joe Schenck, Schenck? How do you say it?
Skank.
Skank. Sorry, Joe. R.I.P.
Yeah.
Buys Charlie Chaplin's lot, calls it the Keaton Studio,
Mhm.
hands him a contract for $1,000 a week, plus 25% of the profits. That sounds like a good contract.
Yes.
They don't hand out contracts like that anymore.
He never had any shares in the company, though. It's this
Oh,
funny
sure.
thing
Right,
where they're
right.
like, here's your own company, and here's your salary, and here's all this. By the way, the company isn't yours.
And
Yeah, he was a horrible businessman throughout his whole life.
Never cared.
Right, because he just liked to do it, right? He
Yeah.
was like, I get to make movies. What do I care? what
Right.
you
He's like,
pay
that's
me?"
not the
Right.
point. Yeah.
And he starts to do 2 reelers, right? Including his first being the High Sign. Hello, Dana, your Twitter handle, of
Yes.
course.
Yeah.
2 reelers. Explain what that is, because I will admit something.
Uh-huh.
Before I listened to the book, I
Mhm.
never knew what the fuck you guys were saying.
When
And
we
you
said
would
2
say it
reeler,
all the time, and I would just be like, okay.
well, you got to reel a film, right? But that doesn't have a whole movie on it. It just has some of the movie.
It has 10 minutes on
Right.
it.
So,
and
you
then 2
know.
reelers, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a
basically.
20-minute short.
But like that was such common parlance that was how like everyone understood the relationship between reels and time. It wasn't just like some industry insider term. The 3 Ages poster, the tagline is like 3 Ages, 3 stories told in 6 parts. And I was like, 6 parts? It's not like they're split into chapters, each of the stories. It's like, oh no, they're literally just conveying to the audience this one's an hour long.
Right.
Even though
right.
there aren't those demarcations within the narrative.
Right. We will talk more about the shorts later.
Yes.
On a separate episode, guys.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I don't know how much more should we cover before we get to 3 Ages.
I mean, I
We
think
should
all
talk
you
3
need to know
Ages,
is
right.
that was his kind of training ground.
That's
And that's
right,
what
right.
most comedies were at that time. Nobody was really making feature-length comedies. Then Chaplin started doing it in 1921.
Right.
And then, the
Fatty Arbuckle,
moment
of
came
course,
for Keaton in
gets-
23.
Right. And 23 is also when Arbuckle gets arrested, right?
No,
Or
that
is
happened in
is that earlier?
21.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
21.
He was in
okay.
3 trials over the next year or so. So by 1923,
Hey,
hung jury twice.
Yeah.
But yeah, by 23, his career is essentially over. I mean, there's a little bit of a renaissance right before he died, but he's behind the camera now, not in front
Yes,
of the
right.
camera.
He
has to
started
change his
directing,
name,
which is
direct,
sort of interesting.
gag writer.
Also
under
interesting.
pseudonyms.
It's like a biopic. I mean, different
Yes.
biopic, but like that's sort of a fascinating final act. Also, Buster marries Madeline Talmadge,
Mhm.
which we mentioned. Right, like you say,
But it's this odd
features. It's the new hot stuff.
It's this odd journey of like he even resented the fact that post Saphead they didn't let him jump straight into features, where he's like, I could have gotten like another 6 years ahead of Chaplin and Lloyd, right? And basically they threw me back to shorts. And it was not because they didn't believe in him. There was still this question of like,
does anyone want to sit back?
Are feature length comedies a thing? Can you actually
I mean,
sustain
shorts were
that?
part of the way you watched movies, right? The
Right,
same way
right.
you'd have a cartoon beforehand or a newsreel or whatever. You watch a short comedy and then a full length drama, probably.
They were like, that's the ideal format for comedy, and then the main feature is a drama, or it's something a little
Oh, and
more
the fact
serious.
is, thank God he had a few years of making shorts because those are some of the greatest American comedies ever
Absolutely.
made.
And it also makes him like so perfectly. He's worked through almost everything by the time he starts making features. But yes, he's
And Lloyd also kicks off in 21, right? That's Sailor
Yeah.
Made Man. That's like his first, yeah.
You're going from vaudeville act to then figuring out how to be a vaguely solo act to then,
Yeah, I watched his like safety last.
Safety
yes, that's the big one.
Hanging from a clock.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which people often misattribute to Buster.
Yeah, people think that's Buster. I feel
Well,
like that is
everybody
common.
blurs all the silent comics together. I
Yes,
can't
yeah,
tell you how many
yeah.
times I'd have a conversation saying, I'm working on a book on Buster Keaton. And I'd either
They'd be
hear,
like, "Oh, you made
I
the
love when
potato
he hangs
stance?"
off the clock,
Uh-huh.
right? Or I love when he eats his shoe, right?
Yes.
One being Lloyd, one being Chaplin. So
Yes.
it makes sense if you've never seen a silent movie, but it's sort of in people's mind, it's black and white, there's a funny guy.
It does he does feel like he should have eaten a shoe at some point. It does kind of feel like something he would do and not
Except that it's a
move his
poverty
face.
gag,
I
which
know
is
it's
not a
poverty.
very
I know,
not a very Keaton thing.
Right.
No, it's more that he just would be like, yeah, I'm eating a shoe. What do I care?
Well, but it's I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll define this, but yeah, going from vaudeville to solo act to then shadowing Arbuckle as both an on-camera performer and filmmaker to Saphead is almost this weird thing that comes like surprisingly early, where they finally go, okay, you're a leading man, but now go back to shorts. Now reset
Yes.
in shorts, and they're yours.
Right.
You're the main voice on them, which then leads to this point where they throw the ability to make feature films at him, which Three Ages, the first movie we're talking about today, now that we've gotten through 5 hours of context, that's incredibly important. Three Ages
These
was,
are also his most slight films.
I agree.
It's worth the right.
but Three Ages by design
It's
was
3 shorts,
yes,
right, that are being intertwined.
because part of the insurance policy was if we're fucking wrong and this fails, we can just split this back up into 3 shorts and redistribute it back out, which they never did. The
No.
movie worked. It was a hit.
And it is sort of a parody of intolerance, right? Like there's sort of
Yes.
some element of him making fun
Right.
of
I
intolerance.
mean, it's a thing
Yeah.
he did a
The
lot
D.W.
throughout his
Griffin
career is spoof different genres. And
Right.
this is a spoof of a few different genres, right?
Yeah.
It's a spoof of the swords and sandals, gladiator epic, like Ben-Hur, which had been a huge hit a few
Yes.
years
Mhm.
before. Or wait, maybe Ben-Hur wasn't made yet, actually. We
No,
should look
the
that up.
original Ben, like the old, like silent Ben-Hur, I think.
I think it was
is- maybe it's
25, though. I think it may have been
yeah.
a little bit later.
Well,
That's the
Ben
one
Hur
that
was
we're-
around like
Ben-Hur, he was actually the real Ben-Hur. Yeah, he was
Yeah.
more of a sort of like,
I think
sort
that
of
came
0
before.
BC.
Yeah.
Right.
exactly.
But
no, because like
but
the
at any
25
rate-
one, right, is where like so many people got stumped by horses making that movie. Right?
Yeah.
Like, sorry, go ahead.
But these
What you said, stomped by horses?
Yeah, because like they have the chariot stuff, and like safety was not paramount concern back then.
And Babylon is actually smart on that.
it wasn't
Yes.
paramount
the
concern. It was
danger.
more of a universal concern. Go on.
Yes, Babylon, right, is very smart on the right.
Yeah.
you know.
But no, he's spoofing
Yes.
D.W. Griffith most obviously in
Right.
Intolerance, right? With the trans historical epic thing, but also all different genres of movie. I actually love the caveman stuff, even though it has some of the stupidest gags. I'm
I
such a
think that's
sucker
the
for
funniest
caveman
part.
jokes
Yeah.
of any kind.
I think also just because it's so funny to see him in that outfit, and I don't know. Yes, the
But
caveman is
also,
sort of the funniest.
You're like, he's like fucking 40 years ahead of the Flintstones in
True.
just the very basic, like,
sliding down a
what
dinosaur's neck.
is right? What is the ancient prehistory version of our modern like creature comforts and conveniences? Right, the stuff like the sundial watch.
Yep.
Is like him using the Roman helmet as like a lock, a boot
For the wheel, right?
on the wheel.
Right.
Like that stuff is like so ahead of its time and is still the kind of comedy we traffic in today that does not feel old at all. It is fascinating how much these two movies are like in conversation with their time in this very modern way, where he's like playing off of the tropes that people know from other popular culture at the time and subverting them.
Apparently, the safety lock thing
Mhm.
that was like a brand new invention at
Yeah.
that time. Like there was like a spike that looked like a Roman helmet that was like whatever. It was the club of
That's
its
like
time.
doing a
Right.
fucking NFT gag.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Like, right.
He was like everyone would get that. Like
Yeah.
that's this is the new thing to stop someone from stealing your car. I guess it was probably pretty easy to steal a car back then.
I mean, he's always into old technology, right? When we get
Yes.
to our hospitality, we'll talk about that old train. But I mean, even though he himself was on the cutting edge of technology,
Yes.
right? And always interested in machines, a great tinkerer
love
with
that train.
machines.
We are going to
He
talk about
loved
that
looking
train.
back at the history of technology. So it makes sense that to him, ancient Rome would be this source of, let's figure out what we can do with a chariot. How many gags can we get out of a
Right.
chariot?
Well, Buster, I mean, a pin for the entire miniseries, loves trains almost as much as Miyazaki loves planes. Like, anytime he can work a train into the thing. And I think part of it is the fact that, like, with the train, so much of the mechanism is visible on the outside, that you have such an understanding of how it's working in real time in an inherently visual medium. But yes, there is that thing where, like, there's this part of the Buster character, especially in Three Ages, but it persists in a lot of his movies, where it's like he's the one modern person in an ancient time, right?
Mm.
He sort of has this modern understanding of like, why wouldn't you just do this? There's this very casual attitude to him, just sort of, because Ben and I, once again, were talking after Sherlock Jr., and we were trying to like break down the comedic persona because it's so odd that he is able to, within the same movie, scene by scene, maybe even sometimes moment by moment, swing between being high status and low status, right? That narratively he is almost always under the boot, right?
Right.
Most Buster movies end up at their center being about a romantic rivalry, a fair maiden who is betrothed or entangled with some burly asshole guy.
Wallace Beery type.
Yeah.
The perfect example is in of the three different time periods. The modern time period, there's this gag early on where the one suitor that's not Buster, he hands his bank statement and it says First National Bank, and
Yes.
Buster says Last National Bank.
Exactly. Like, the joke is about this guy is
He doesn't
so
have money. He's not
fucking
like
low
he's-
status in
He's
life.
not.
He's a
good
schlemiel,
for-
right.
He's not good for
Schlemiel.
the.
But you're
the
right,
daughter.
Griffin, that he's a schlemiel who can, in an instant, like with a gesture, he can transform into this kind of like elegant dandy, as he
Right.
does a couple times in the modern
Who can
segment.
adapt so quickly, who is somehow smarter than everyone else without feeling like he's pulling one over on anyone else, And I think that's that thing that Buster talked about, where it's like, there's a quote in here, but he didn't want to have to think about making his character sympathetic to the audience, right? He thought that was sort of like a dangerous path to worry too much about likability. But also, this was just so bone deep in him after, at this point, he's been performing for 15 plus years. He just has such an innate sense of when the audience is on his side and when he isn't without having to intellectualize it. And he puts the character in situations where you're innately going to want to root for him because he's the more honest person, right? He's the less aggressive person. It's a thing that's fascinating about Three Ages. It's kind of, I think its biggest failing is this character is a little too aggressive in all three timelines.
The thing where he passes the note where he's like, lose the chump, I'm pretending to be sleeping
Right.
behind you or whatever. Like, you're like, that's not going to work.
No.
Like, I mean, it's funny that it doesn't work.
Like that's
Wait, but it's
but
Wallace
there's
Beery who
bravado
hands him
to
that
it.
note. He's not the one who hands him
No,
the
you're
note.
right. It's Wallace Beery
Yes.
who hands the note. Right. Sorry.
but there are other bits in this where you're like, he's a little too competitive. Whereas I feel
like
like
where they're doing the caveman competition.
yeah,
and,
I mean, obviously
yeah,
this movie ends up
it's funny.
having three centerpiece competitions,
Yes.
literally. But I also
I just
feel
like the hitting yourself on
the
the head,
romantic
you know?
rivalry thing, which once again, then it's Popeye and Bluto, it's all
Right,
of these
right,
fucking narratives.
Wallace Beery is very Bluto.
Yes.
Very, yeah.
I feel like in later movies, it's so much more. He just loves this woman and wants her attention. It's less about I got to get over on this guy. And in Three Ages, he's trying to defeat three guys. He's viewing it as a competition more than just like I'm here and I wish he could pay attention to me.
Yeah, the truest stories, you're right. The stories that are truest to his essence as a performer, I think, are not when it's Popeye and Bluto competing for a girl, though that
Right.
happens a lot in the early phases. It's when he's either against the elements, like
Yes.
Steamboat Bill Jr., right? He's against
Mhm.
something sort of fated, or the train theft in the general. It's when there's a big problem to solve, and he's this little guy trying to solve it.
But even when you have the Wallace Beery type who ends up, getting diminished as a character as the films go on, because yes, the larger circumstances of the world around him are more of an obstacle than this guy. This guy is maybe just the final barrier. I think part of his charm and part of what makes him connect with audiences is post Three Ages, he never knows that there's a competition going on, right? One of the most unsavory aspects of the guy who is his romantic rival is that guy is viewing this like a fight, that he has to beat Buster.
Right.
And you look at Our Hospitality, and he cracks this thing of like, the best thing could be Buster never knowing that everyone's trying to kill him.
He's sort of blissfully unaware.
He's
for much of
appealing
the
to everyone's
film,
best
right.
nature and going like, that's dangerous to be firing pistols off in the air like that. You know, he's almost looking out for everyone
Also,
else.
he deals with a waterfall, another in that movie. We'll talk about it, but like another sort of immovable object of nature.
Three Ages, which is Intolerance, D.W. Griffith's epic that was sort of semi his response to...
Better known as I'm Not Mad, or I'm Not Owned.
It's the ultimate I'm Not Owned movie. Birth of the Nation is like the biggest fucking hit, and everyone immediately calls out that it's racist.
Because it's very racist.
Yes, it's just
it's 1915 racist. That's the thing about. Birth
I think
of a
when
I mean, I don't know how you feel about Birth of a Nation, but it's undeniably
not
racist.
pro. Let's just say.
I mean, obviously, it is a pioneering piece of visual storytelling. I guess in some ways, not really. I feel like its reputation is overstated. Right.
This is my only point.
But its influence is important, and that's why I think it still needs to be seen
because
by
it was a hit. Right.
Right.
But it sort of became this weird kind of like start of film 101. That maybe it didn't deserve to.
Oh
be.
yeah, no, it gets kind of retconned into inventing all kinds of things.
You need to show it in
invent.
every fucking film school class in your syllabus.
But it was a huge hit and a very controversial film.
This was the point I want to make. It's just that I think people now, when they try to approach Birth of a Nation as a historical document, they go, I can't believe this horribly racist movie was popular and beloved in its day. And you're like, it was controversial in its day.
Right.
It was a huge hit and it had big fans.
Right.
But even at the time, it got the same fucking discourse cycle that any controversial movie
it was
gets
protested.
today.
Absolutely.
Yes, people were like up in arms about it. And then, yes, D.W. Griffith does this. I'm not mad. I'm so not mad. I'm going to make an epic about how bad Intolerance is, set in 3 different time periods.
Four time periods.
You're right.
But it's the same basic idea.
But Three Ages is him riffing on that. He's doing a parody of a movie that has been huge in the popular consciousness that also gives him this easy escape route if it doesn't work to just turn it into themed 2-reelers.
Have you seen Intolerance? Of course, I'm sure you've seen Intolerance. I have not seen it.
Oh, Intolerance is such a tough sit.
So boring.
But the thing it's really worth it for is the frame story. I mean, speaking of Father Time again, right? It's Keaton's version of the frame story. The endlessly rocking cradle of time. There's this crazy sort of, I mean, just the vision of women and Intolerance is utterly nuts. You're either sort of like a snake dancing vamp, who's going to bring down the entire Babylonian Empire, or you're a pure Lillian Gish virgin rocking a cradle for all eternity.
I remember Lillian Gish, yes.
So Buster's big take on Three Ages is obviously I'm going to take the structure from Intolerance, which everyone will get what I'm riffing on, and then my sort of point, the theme that is staying the same throughout the ages rather than being intolerant from one man to another is romantic courtship. Right? That basically he's saying the social mores, the behaviors of men and women, in painting a very broad brush, remain the same regardless of the times around us. Is one of the things, this movie has incredible gags in it, but you do feel that insurance policy quality of, if this doesn't work, we'll split it into 3 shorts.
Yeah, it doesn't really hang together structurally.
It doesn't.
Some of them are way too short.
They're not like really commenting on each other or weaving out in interesting ways. You're just kind of seeing the same narrative 3 times, but with different clothing.
And I love the idea so much when it starts. I'm just like, oh, this is going to be so cool. And then you realize, no, it's just this again now. But he's wearing a straw.
But that's why, I mean, as we'll see in Our Hospitality, it's so exciting to see the moment that he actually figures out, wait, here's how I tell, a through composed story about real characters, right? And it's so beautiful when he hits that. The jump from
first movie to second movie is insane.
I mean, I talk in the book a bit about the cinema of attractions, right?
Yes.
Like this idea that in the early days of cinema, really early, like turn of the century, that movies were about just seeing stuff that was fun and interesting. Like I've never seen an elephant.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of early cinema, but certainly Three Ages still owes a kind of debt to that, because even though it has this, structure of the 3 different time frames, it really, the best moments are where it's sort of sketch comedy, like the moment that made me laugh out loud again, rewatching it this morning, and I've seen this movie, dozens of times, is when he gets served the crab in the restaurant in the modern story, and he's just like terrified of the crab on his plate and jumps into the waiter's arms. It's such good physical comedy. It's so silly. It has nothing to do with the story. Those are the moments you watch Three Ages for.
Yes. I like the bits that jump out to me that I just think are like, well, this is where he's totally nailing what his persona is as a leading man in a feature-length film. The guilelessness that makes him still lovable, is even when he's doing something absurd. The moment where he's at the dinner and the woman starts applying her makeup and he just looks over at her and then goes like, huh, reaches under the table, pulls out a kit. You don't quite understand what's happening. And then he starts wet shaving.
Right.
And
Right.
it's just this logical leap that he is able to sell so well in his body language for how famous he is in his face largely being unchanging, right? He is so good at somehow playing thinking on screen without pantomiming it in any way, where you can see the thought of, oh, if she's doing that, I should do this. You don't quite know what he's doing. And then the moment it comes together, it is so incredibly funny that he's now lathering up.
Well,
And-
it's this like contamination logic that he
Yes.
often has in the Arbuckle movies too, where somebody, some other character is doing some gesture that makes sense, and he starts imitating it even though it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Another great moment, and this is again just how great his gestural comedy was, is when the girl who we need to talk about, Margaret Leahy, who
We
plays
do
that
need to
woman,
mention,
because
yes, this, one
she's a whole other,
performance.
she's a big
contest
reason the
winner.
movie does not work in many
Agreed.
places.
Yes.
But she's doing her little walkie fingers on the couch as she flirts
Yes.
with Wallace Beery, and then he just starts doing it as well. But then he gets so caught up in his own little cute walkie fingers that he's
Right,
just
he's
doing it to
distracted
do
by
it.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
There's this part of Buster that's great, which is like, oh, I get it. And he doesn't, but he does it so confidently and he can't be corrected.
But like you say, like there's refining of the persona happening here. Margaret Leahy, just to mention, had won a beauty contest, correct? And
One of the prizes in the contest was to be in a movie.
it was to be in a movie called Within the Law,
Yes.
opposite Norma Talmadge. And after 3 days on set, Frank Lloyd said that she couldn't act, and
She was basically shunted off onto Keaton. Like
Right.
nobody
Was like,
cared
get
who
rid
the
of
leading
her.
ladies were in his comedies. Joe Skank, I think, even said, "Doesn't matter. All she has to do is stand there
We essentially
and
have
look
a
pretty."
contractual obligation to put her in a movie where what she's doing matters even less.
And you see how
yes.
much it
Apparently
does matter
they
when
had
you
to
see,
shoot
for
lots of
example, the shaving
takes.
scene. That's not Margaret Leahy, right? That's
Yes.
Virginia Fox, who was a leading lady in a lot of later Keaton movies, and some shorts before that, I think. I don't know if she was in any features, but she was in a bunch of shorts with him. And she's funny. Like
Yes.
right? She has some sense of like gestural comedy. She knows why the joke is meant to work. And it makes a huge difference, even though it is true that, in most of his films, the exception is Sybil Seeley, who's a wonderful leading lady who actually got her own stuff to do. But most of the time, his leading ladies sort of are just the pretty prize you win at
Right.
the end.
And he
But
was-
it still matters in
and he really
silent
put
movies that
emphasis.
you
need to be able
can
to
act.
Right. He was sort of reductive about, like, it doesn't matter as long as they're pretty.
Yes.
He didn't view it as a priority in his films, but it is a differentiating factor between the ones that are good
Also,
and the ones that are
silent
great.
film acting just seems like a very specific skill. Not that regular film acting isn't, but
Yes.
like that seems like something you could really do disastrously.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of beauty contest castings,
Right.
and Claire Bow actually came from that
Yeah.
background. But yeah, Margaret Leahy was a real dud. And I think that's part of what makes a lot of this movie feel less alive than it could.
Well, and, like, acting is reacting, right? You need someone who has that. I think a lot of times when you put people in movies who do not come from an acting background, right, who are celebrities in some other field, that's the thing you notice is they're putting way too much spin on the ball when it's their dialogue, when it's their close up, when it's their moment where they're leading the scene. And then when someone else is doing something, they kind of go blank. There's the term camera napping that I
Mhm.
saw in JJ's research was the thing they kept on yelling at Leigh about while they were filming of like,
Yes, so that she'd be caught napping.
right.
But this would be like she'd be doing what she was supposed to do, what they'd rehearse, and then Buster would have an idea and try something else out. And if she didn't follow, that was being
But I
that
think
was
it's also that
napping,
thing
right?
of like, what do I need to do in this scene?
Right.
And you're so intensely focused on what you need to do next that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you.
And this is, I think, important for the way Keaton worked, is that he really did consider everyone a collaborator. He had a team, of, his cameraman, his production designer, people that he had worked with for years. And he wanted everybody, even the extras, to be sort of part of the collaborative process. He liked to get things on the first take. He liked it to feel fresh and for it to be kind of, alive on camera and on set.
He wanted like a family around him, which makes sense with what he came from.
Right.
But he had no like sort of
A trustworthy ensemble. Yeah.
he didn't have the same kind of like persnickety, obsessive, auteur personality that even like Lloyd and Chaplin had at the time. There's something so fascinating about the way that I think Keaton really thought of himself as like a craftsperson and not some hoity-toity artist. Right?
Yeah.
He didn't have that pretension about him, even though he cared a lot about getting things right. But there's the gag in 3 Ages in the modern segment where he tries to make the leap from building to building. And
Yes, I wanted to make sure we talked about that because it's one of the great stunts in his entire career. So
It's
even though the
incredible.
movie is weak, it's worth it for that moment.
Yeah, the fall. I don't know. It seems like it should be
Well,
dead.
You know the story behind it, right?
Do you know this, David?
No, I mean, it may be in the research, but no, I don't know. Assume I know nothing.
Okay.
I know the guy had a stone face and there's trains in his movies, and I've seen
Flat
like
hat.
4 of them.
You should read a
know.
book, man.
I know. Well, this is the thing. I'm going to read everything once we've done this series. I wanted to watch the movie.
Do you want to tell this story, Dana?
Yeah, I mean, you can jump in, but I mean, essentially that gag, the roof to roof jump, or that stunt rather,
Where
which
he,
is
like,
a
jumps, he grabs
elaborate
the other
multi-part
thing.
stunt, right?
Right,
He
and then
jumps
he
from roof
falls
to roof,
down.
doesn't make it, hits 3 awnings on the way down. John Wick quotes that later on, by the way. I can't remember which
Your
one of
piece
them.
on that was very
That
great.
Chaz Stahelski was so fun to talk to about Keaton.
Yeah.
So then he grabs the drain pipe, right?
Yes.
The drain pipe then kind of flops down lever style against the building, pitches him through a window. He then happens to land in a firehouse, slides through the firehouse dorm, goes down the hole and the pole, right, that you have to have in the old-fashioned firehouse, and then lands on the truck just as it's pulling out. So it's this whole great Rube Goldberg with him as the projectile kind of gag.
Now,
but it was all an accident.
Yep. In the script, David,
He's supposed to make it.
lands the jump. And
Which should also be impressive because it's a
Absolutely.
pretty big jump.
but he like actually fucks up and
Uh-huh.
falls and is out of commission for like 2 or 3 days, right?
Yeah,
to
he hits
recover?
a net, but he gets injured enough that he takes a few days off, and that's when his gag writers say, "Hey, I think we can use this piece of footage and turn it into this
That's the thing.
extended gag."
So when he's basically recovering from the fall, they go like, "Well, the footage is so fucking good. We
Right.
just watched this. The fall is so funny. It would be stupid not to rewrite the next 5 minutes of the movie around the fallout from the fall." And
That's
it's like
fucking
that sort of
crazy.
looseness, and just like when you get something that works on camera, you go with it. There's the similar gag in Mission Impossible Fallout.
Yeah, where
When
he
Tom
breaks his
Cruise
leg,
similarly
yes.
injures himself for real, trying to make basically the exact same leap with very similar framing. And you hear interviews with Macquarie. We talk all the time about when he does these 3-hour-long Empire interviews whenever a new one comes out. The way those movies are made are kind of the only films that are made the way Buster used to make his movies, where it's like we have locations, we have cast,
We have stunt professionals. We have people who know what they're doing. But
And
like,
how did
things
they?
can be improvised.
Remind me, how did they extend that accident and make it look? Turn it into a
smaller.
longer
I mean,
stunt.
he basically, because he, rather than making the jump, he like goes into the wall and he grabs it, but he doesn't land on it. And then they play the rest of the thing with him sort of
limping.
It's a smaller adjustment, but when they talk about those movies, they like don't have a traditional script in place per se.
I
They
didn't know
cast
that. Very
actors
Keatonian.
to
Yeah.
fulfill, and they always like the first 4 Mission Impossibles. They would try to write a proper script, and it wouldn't work, and they'd be rewriting stuff on the fly. And basically, when Macquarie comes on, he was like, "We have to stop trying to control this in advance." And now they go like, "Find me some good locations, Tom. What are stunts you've always wanted to do? Let's start planning these." And then in real time, we're going to watch footage and go, "What we could use here is a scene connecting these 2 characters in between. Oh, this thing turned out well, so let's write around this now." And those movies are very organically developed around great places, great set pieces, great sort of larger concepts that then they find the narrative to weave in between.
Interesting. Well, Stahelski does exactly that with the John Wick
Yes.
movies. And when I was
Very
interviewing
similar.
him about the Keaton influence on his work, he said this sentence that was almost verbatim the way that Keaton talked about scripting his movies in advance, which was, we get the beginning and the end, and then the middle will work itself out. And he didn't even realize that he was quoting the Keaton practice.
And Keanu is so bustery in those movies.
And just in general, like he is a great stone face. Yes, no.
I
he
think
always
he's a
has
big
been.
fan.
Clearly.
I believe
And he actually, I don't know if he's read it, but he is in possession of my book. Because I made sure it got to him when it came out. Because he's one of I feel like he's one of his, part of the legacy in the modern age, along with Jackie Chan.
Yeah, I saw so many people say about the 4th movie, like, "Oh, you can really feel like Keanu's getting up there in age. It's hard for him to walk." And I'm like, I think that is a conscious decision because the first
The
movie
character is tired. Like,
Right.
is that what yes, exactly. Yes.
It's like it's part of this thing of like this very subtle, innate. How do you make sure the audience is still on this guy's side kind of thing that Buster Keaton had in his bones as well? Of like the first movie, you set up the paradigm of dead wife dog gets killed, car gets stolen. We're gonna root for this guy no matter what, right? 3 movies later, we've watched him kill 1 billion people. We're pretty far away from both of the traumatic deaths. At some point, does this guy start feeling unlikable? Does he start feeling too high status? And it's like, no, you have to like adjust in real time. The more tired he seems, the more broken he is, the more honest he is in his emotions, the more we're still gonna root for him. Other gags I like in Three Ages.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the dinosaur. The dinosaur is incredible.
Thank you for reminding me. Here's a take I want to hear if you agree with this or not,
Sure.
Dana. And this was a thing that crystallized in the way you talked about in your book. The actuality is how much movies at the time were about seeing things. Just literally, if you put a thing on screen that people hadn't seen before, it would blow their fucking minds. And so you basically have like 2 languages developing in cinema in the early days, which is sort of the Lumiere, let's just show you life as it is. Let's show you different places. Let's show you different things. Let's give you a slice of reality, right? This sort of docudrama style being developed. And then you have Méliès, who is like a magician, who is using illusions and tricks to show you things that could never exist, that could
Right.
only exist within this specific medium in this kind of way. And I think Chaplin and Lloyd are much more into the like creating a fantastical world around themselves, where things like the clock and Chaplin going through the gears, you know,
Mhm.
or the roller skating sequence and city lights in the mall are based on, I know this isn't real. I know this is a setup device, but part of what you're enjoying is this sort of clockwork, the craft of building this artificial reality. Whereas I think so much of Buster's language is shooting his movies like they are actualities, that they have a very unfussy style, so that you're watching something that feels very similar to the actualities, the documentaries you'd be seeing at that time.
Right.
And
If only to prove it's his body really doing the stunts.
And then something unbelievable happens in the middle of it. Three Ages kind of breaks that a little bit because it goes so far into the 2 earlier time
Yeah, well, that's why
periods.
the dinosaur, although it's fun to see because it's early animation, is
isolation,
very
amazing.
very un-Keaton-esque. Yeah,
Right. It's like
because it's a special effect.
I love those 30 seconds, and then it kind of fucks up the rest of the movie.
I mean, even a moment, I think this happens when he's used as a kind of catapult, right?
Yeah.
When he knocks out Wallace Beery because he's being catapulted somehow in the caveman section. You know, clearly something is that trajectory is not the natural trajectory of his body, and that's very un-Keaton-esque
Yeah.
because he really did like to keep the camera far enough back and, you know, the special effects to a minimum so that you are aware like somebody is really doing that and it's really him that's doing it.
Right. And the trickery he tries to employ, he makes invisible. You know, or if there is a
Right.
special effect gag in a movie that was more apparent, it's something like Sherlock Jr. or the double exposures in Cameraman, where that's part of the narrative, is something weird is going on with the camera. You know, we're using the language that audiences know rather than trying to pull one over on them.
This is also, it's a reference to Gertie the dinosaur,
Yes.
a cartoon from
Winsor McKay.
1914. Right.
It basically credited as the first major
has, like-
piece of screened animation.
Right. It has like
Is it stop motion?
It was hand
it's
drawn.
hand drawn. It's like
It's Winsor
very,
McKay.
very
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
simple,
Yeah,
you know,
Who
beautiful.
created Little Nemo and
Right.
Slumberland. But part of the thing
which
was,
of course was then turned into the biggest movie of 2022, Slumberland.
yeah, a movie that
We all remember it.
absolutely exists. That exists so much it hurts. I think part of this routine was Winsor McKay would go around and project this and interact with Gertie in real time on stage. That was sort of the trick of like, oh my God, he's done this piece of animation that in and of itself is impressive, but it's also timed out with a routine where he can have some back and forth. And
That's a whole cinema of attractions thing too, right?
Absolutely.
Narrated movies, which is
Right.
just it's something great that only existed for whatever 20 years at the beginning of the medium.
So they write this gag where Wallace Beery is on an elephant, and they go, how do they one up an elephant? And he's like, a dinosaur. And his gag writers are like, Buster, what the fuck are you talking about? We can't have you ride a dinosaur. And he goes
they
like,
were probably like, Busty, you're crazy.
and then he said, what the fuck are you talking about? No, but he was like, I remember seeing Gertie when I was a kid. We can just do that kind of thing. A thing that is incredibly difficult to do, and even
Right.
more difficult to do in stop motion, which is a different medium.
Right.
Um,
They took him 52 takes, apparently.
right, because it has to sync up so perfectly.
I think he did love that kind of challenge, even though it's not very
Yes.
typical of his filmmaking style. And if we talk about the Playhouse, his
Mhm.
short, The Playhouse, you'll see him using, I don't know what you'd call it, but masking,
Yes.
being able to redouble his own image in a way that was way more sophisticated than anyone was doing at the time.
He's like, I think of him as like an engineer
Yes.
on top of everything else. Right.
But that's the difference. From this point out, it's like, I want to make a watch. I want this to be unfussy. I want the mechanics to be hidden behind it.
right.
I want
It
part of
won't
the
be
thing
showy
for the audience to say to themselves, there's no way that's a special effect. How is that possible?
We should move on from 3 Ages to Our Hospitality, unless there's anything else in 3 Ages we want to
I
discuss.
really like
Chariot.
So it's right. Same narrative.
You
3
like this
times.
gag very much.
I like this gag
That you're
very
about to
much.
invoke.
Right. I think the Roman narrative maybe the caveman has good gags as well. Where the modern one is the one that feels
The modern one feels kind of flat.
But it has some of the best jokes in it.
It does have
I
funny
think
jokes.
it's got that roof jump that we talked about.
Yeah.
This jump is cool.
And I think the scene in the cafe has a lot of great moments. I love the crab. I love when he gets
the
drunk.
shaving,
Just
obviously.
how subtly he plays the
It's
drunk.
pretty good.
Right? The
five-star.
way you see how
Yeah.
he believes in himself the minute he
Yes.
starts getting drunk, right?
That funny thing. I mean, you said in the beginning of that narrative where he's trying to understand how flirtation works by watching Wallace Beery and copying him incorrectly or getting too caught up in things. The chariot race, they're using the actual LA Coliseum, which has just been built for the Olympics, which gives you so much fucking production value.
Right.
Like, you cannot believe how huge this thing looks and decked out with real extras. But there's been a major snowfall the day before. So he has the idea to turn his chariot into a sled.
Right.
So he has like a dog sled.
So it really did snow in LA that
No. That's a written gag, I think. I believe. Yeah. That.
Oh, I
has
thought
to
you were
have
saying he was using
been.
actual
No, sorry.
snow.
I'm saying the character in the
within
movie.
within the film.
Right.
That is the thing. Yes.
The gag I love is the spare dog in the back of the chariot, which feels like another modern problem for historical problem. How does he sort of have the foresight? And then there's also the sort of the holy shit aspect there where you're like, there's no big special effect there, but part of the laugh is, holy shit, so this whole take I've been watching, there's just been a dog hanging out there in the back. In real life, he's just had a dog in that box.
Yeah, he loved to work with animals. And actually, the other stunt that really always wows me in the
Yeah.
Roman section is that crazy moment when he rides a horse into a sort of an archway, and then he shimmies up a pole that he's holding on the horse. It's all done in one take,
Yeah.
and goes into some sort of upper door in that structure. I mean, that's just such a dangerous stunt.
Yes. And Our Hospitality has the incredible dog routine. But then the lion, I think the lion stuff is really funny,
Mhm.
but it's very similar to the dinosaur shit where it kind of kills reality, where you're like, here's a guy in a lion costume giving up performance.
It's a pretty good
I
costume.
have to say, it's
I
the
think the
it's the
costume
Frank
and the
Oz of the
performance are great.
20s. That guy animates that lion
But this is
beautifully.
the thing. I'm like,
Yes.
same way I feel about the dinosaur. I love this while I'm watching it. The craft of it, I think, is kind of incredible.
He starts like petting he's like, I'm gonna get a
Right.
thorn out of the lion's paw, like, in the story or whatever.
Right, I'm gonna do his nails, and that way he won't
Right.
attack me.
Right.
Right. And then you see the lion sort of preening and
funny.
looking out, checking out his own whatever. But all of that's funny when I'm watching it. The moment it ends, you are sort of like, so this is now just anything can happen.
Right.
You're
Right.
so untethered from reality.
Yeah, the whole movie is a grab bag, basically, right?
Versus watching him deal with a real dog where you're more impressed by every single thing that's happening because you can't believe he got it out of him.
Right.
And then it ends with the same sort of epilogue 3 times where, he beats Wallace Beery in competition. He ends up with the woman and they have a bunch of kids. Second narrative, they have a bunch of kids. Third narrative, they have a dog. I don't really get what the commentary there is.
Might just be funny.
Were people fucking less in those days? Like, I don't know what the...
Early 20s? No,
I mean,
think-
families were getting smaller and people
Okay,
were urbanizing.
sure.
To the extent there's any kind of social satire in the movie,
Child
it's sort of that
mortality is on the
moment.
way down. You don't have
Sure.
to have 8 kids anymore. I don't know.
Now, Our Hospitality, immediately he's like, I'm going to tell a fucking story. I'm going to make a
Yes.
proper
Also, I mean,
movie.
3 Ages was also successful,
Yeah.
right? Like, so it's sort of, it merits him as like, you are now a feature director. You do not need
Right.
to worry about this anymore.
But basically, the reviews of it were like, the narrative doesn't really make any sense.
Sure.
It's not that
Funny.
engrossing. It succeeds as 60 minutes of funny shit
Who
happening.
are film critics back then? And obviously they existed because
Well, Richard
Griffin
Brody,
hated them.
obviously.
But like, who are the like? Did you read criticism?
Oh yeah,
And,
there's
you know,
two.
like-
There's actually 2 chapters on the development of film criticism
Because
because
it is
once
fascinating to
again it was
consider.
really in tandem with his life. You
Right,
know, I mean,
obviously.
Basically, film criticism at the beginning was just sort of noting that there was this weird thing called film and you could go see it at such and such theater, right? I mean, the cinema of attractions was also there in the coverage, right?
It's what's so funny about early film criticism is half of the criticism is like, we're still not convinced on these movies.
Right.
Oh, yeah,
right,
and it
right.
goes
Like
so
they're half
late.
reviewing the film they watch and half being like, I still think this might die out in 2 years.
Right.
Yeah, there's a guy writing on Chaplin,
Right.
who I quote in the book in 1915, I think, during the year of Chaplinitis, right? That he becomes this huge global phenomenon of fame. And this guy is saying, not only have I never seen a Chaplin movie, I've never seen any movie, a fact of which I remain proud, you know, because he's a theater snob.
I give 3 ages a B+, movies a B-. I remain unconvinced.
But right around 1920, right, when Keaton starts making his own independent movies, there's a whole chapter in the book on this critic, Robert Sherwood, who I consider one of the first real voicey,
And that is a
film
name
critics.
I know. I've heard that name.
And he loved
Right,
Keaton
right.
and was sort of, implicated with his life, like tried to write a failed screenplay for him that never got off the ground. But yeah, film criticism was just starting to take the form that we know it in
And
now.
he's an Algonquin round table guy eventually. I
Yep,
think,
he's one
right?
of those
Yeah,
wits.
yeah. Our Hospitality, originally titled Headin' South,
Mm-hmm.
which is a terrible title.
Horrendous.
Although Our Hospitality is also a terrible title.
They say it once in the movie.
Sure, I don't care.
This is our kind of hospitality.
But
yeah.
I mean, I guess it's sort of a joke at least, right? Like, Our Hospitality is we're going to try and kill you,
Right. Yeah.
right? Is that the gag?
The title was also just Hospitality at one point,
Right.
which
At
I
one
think
point it was Hospitality.
flows a little better.
Yeah.
Yes, I would take that. And obviously it's drafting off of the Hatfield-McCoy feud.
Right. Which here's a funny thing to think about.
Go ahead.
It just this thing that was sort of like loomed large in culture. The East Coast, West Coast rap war of its time was Southern families fighting for generations, right? Like these were the original gang wars, were just families who were like, there was some slight 85 years ago that hasn't even really been explained to me, but now because of it, our families will constantly be fighting each other.
It is. I don't know. Have you ever delved into the Hatfield-McCoy? Did you do it at all for the? You don't have to deal with that when
I
researching.
may
a
have read
book
something about it. For me, it's a lyric from Lukenbach, Texas. That's
Absolutely.
and that's
Yeah.
what it will remain.
Whenever I try to read about it, being like, no, come on, this is an interesting part of folklore, and you just start reading, you're like, this is so boring.
Inscrutable.
Who
Inscrutable.
cares?
But basically, like the Hatfields and
It's
McCoys
two families in the
feud.
South. They didn't like each other. They kept killing each other.
basically get settled in the 1890s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So it's getting settled around the time that he's born
Yeah,
as well. It's
yeah.
another thing that he's just born into of this is now legend. An insane thing to think about. He's making this film in 1921, 22. He films it.
Our
It came out in
Hospitality is
23, right?
23,
Yeah. So he's probably filming in 22 or 23. The Hatfields and McCoys feud is finally like sort of
Yeah.
cast to the wind in like 1892. At the time he's making this movie, it's like as recent history as Air is
Sure.
for
right.
us now.
Right. It's his parents' lifetime.
Right.
Yeah.
You know?
That makes sense.
So
Yeah, sure.
it's a thing that's been dramatized both like literally and sort of like more representationally, this type of thing going on culturally. He's picking a thing that has already been and will continue to be the meat of narrative dramatic films and going like, I'll just slot the comedy into this, which is I think what he finally cracks on this film of, oh, give myself the bones of like a serious dramatic film. Give myself the proper arc and then put the gags in, rather than trying to assemble this as a series of sketches.
Yeah, and the beginning really speaks to that because it's just so odd that you don't see the adult Buster Keaton until almost 9 minutes into the movie, right? And there's this dramatic
Played totally straight.
prologue that could be D.W. Griffith melodrama.
But that's like, half of studio, big, high concept studio comedies are this kind of, we all know this. What if you place the wrong person in the center of that?
Right. So the joke,
Which-
even just seeing him appear for the first time is a joke.
Which is a thing I
Yes.
think he's kind of creating here. I mean, obviously, people have done it in other mediums.
Well, look, it's 1923. You're creating everything.
Exactly.
Like, right, everything could be pioneering
But like
back
this
then,
is the
right.
action comedy. This is the genre riff comedy. This is the sort of fish out of water. Placing in, but in this sort of postmodern way where it's like this is someone more like the audience watching the movie placed into a movie.
Which means he knows enough about his persona at that point that he realizes, oh, just my appearance will be a joke.
Exactly.
But I will say, I was surprised that the first 20 minutes of this movie are very light on humor.
Yeah.
Like, on, like, what I expect from Buster Keaton, I guess.
Yes.
Right? Like,
you don't really start getting gags until the train, which doesn't really start until 20 minutes in and is like a 20-minute segment.
Yes, and then the train is funny, but it's also just sort of interesting. Like it's just sort of visually exciting.
Well, there, I feel like you have to talk about his interest in period stuff, you know,
Yes.
because it's looking forward to the general also, which will be a much more
Yes.
The Man Loves
pristine
Trains.
period piece,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, there he's really trying to reconstruct Matthew Brady photographs from the Civil War, and he's paying attention to historical accuracy and all that. Here, he really is just playing with the past, you know, and I think that goes to his obsession with old technology I was talking about, right? Like, why does he set it in the 1830s? In part because it makes sense to have the Hatfield-McCoy style feud, but also just because he wants to show this crazy 1830s train, you know? And the great bike, you know, that early predecessor of the bike, which is, I think, kind of anachronistic. Like it actually would have been a little before that, but he just wanted to go back and look at these funny old machines and try to sort of recreate them and imagine their daily use.
I think trains should be like that.
Yes.
There's, you know, they can be all terrain.
It should
It's
just
like-
be a series of carriages.
But like they can be on just the ground.
Oh, sure.
And then maybe they'll join some rails later or whatever. You know, like they can do it all.
And there's an old guy on the back with a
who's just
trumpet
like feeding
who's
coal
kind of
into it.
doing
yeah.
a bad job.
Right.
I mean, he literally went back in transportation history and looked for the funniest train. You know, it's not really quite true to the period.
It's got a lot of character.
It's an English train. It wasn't even in America, but he just wanted to find this goofiest
It
looking
is
vehicle he
incredibly
could.
funny. I mean, David, you always joke or perhaps say more seriously than anything else you ever say that if you were an elected official, your platform,
trains.
right? You're just gonna fix
Just
trains.
cover the country.
Just cover the whole
trains.
fucking country with trains. Make
Yeah.
everything run with
I
trains.
mean, I'd probably get booted out of office almost immediately because I would start like seizing land. And sure. Would be like, you can't run a train through here.
but part of your pitch
The
is
railroad baron of the 21st
I'd
century.
be like, what's his name in the Gilded Age being like, no, my railroads will go
Andrew
everywhere."
Carnegie.
Yes. I'd have some big beard, you know.
Part of your pitch for modern train reform is that there should always be a man with a Van Dyke goatee sitting on the back of the caboose, on the roof of the caboose with a large horn,
Yes.
falling asleep and failing to alert people. that
There
things
needs
are
to be
going
a
wrong.
political cartoon of you sitting on top of the Capitol, holding a bag with dollar signs.
Yes.
Old man Sims with his trains. My daughter, I have this like bag filled with, I was obsessed with Thomas the Tank Engine as a child, unsurprisingly.
Yes.
And I had this bag filled with Thomas trains, which were like made of metal back then. I imagine they are
interesting.
not now.
You didn't even have, because I feel like I had the Brio ones, which were wood.
Right, those are wood. No, these are like metal trains.
Wow, those are deadly weapons.
Yeah, are. You can
Yeah.
really, like, especially the big boys.
Yeah.
And
You whip that at daddy's head. You're down for the count.
right. My
Yeah.
daughter was playing with them yesterday. She's finally like seemed to, interested by them. But
Also, by the way, what did I get your daughter for her birthday? What did I get your daughter as a present for her birthday?
why don't you just go ahead and brag about
Duplo train set from Toy Story.
which she loves.
It's check, check, check.
It's got Toy Story
Lego
characters
Toy Story
involved.
trains.
Right.
That's called a fucking hat trick. Perfect gift.
But those trains, like you said, those trains look like this thing.
Yes.
This thing.
It looks like a little child's train set.
Yes.
Where you're like, well, the car wouldn't actually look like that, just like hitched together to the other thing.
And the fantastic joke that it goes at the same pace as the dog.
Yes. They are very sweet together, though, on the train.
this
Like
is-
the romance is quite
That's the
sweet.
thing.
in
He's
this movie.
basically doing like 30 minutes of setting up just this movie having a solid dramatic emotional foundation before he starts doing Buster gags, right? Because like as we said, first 10 minutes is just world building. Here's the feud, here's the rivalry, with the very clever conceit of this woman takes her son out of it, goes cross country, tries to start him anew
Right,
without
get him
knowing
away
that he's
from-
part
Yeah,
of
there's
this
the whole
bloodline.
prologue with the rainy night and all
But
that.
this is
right.
key to the Buster persona that he's finally nailing here in features of this guy can't know he's stuck in the middle of a fight, right?
Sure.
That has to be the thing that makes him so likable is that he's not trying to fuck with anybody. He's just trying to keep on living his life. So you have 10 minutes of that, then 10 minutes where like from the moment they finally cut to the grown-up son and you see it's Buster and he looks like Buster, it does immediately feel funny. You have to
Right.
imagine audiences were just laughing at seeing him in this environment, even though it's still mostly just kind of like laying down tracks.
In New York City.
Yes.
But it's like portrayed as like a dust bowl,
which
like
is funny.
yeah.
That's a D.W. Griffith joke, actually.
Really?
The moment when the intertitle says, "Here's Times Square,"
Right.
whatever it was in 1830, and then it says, "Based on an old print."
Right.
That's something that D.W. Griffith used to do to sort of prove his
Oh, he would
bona
be like,
fides or
"Oh, this
something.
is right,
his
right, right. It's
subtitles
very
would say,
accurate."
"Oh yes, this is based on engraving by so and so."
I didn't get that joke. Okay, that makes sense to me now. Is Buster reading as not macho? I assume yes. Like, was that part of his sort of persona here early on? He's sort of slight.
Yeah.
Like, is it part of the joke? It's like, wait, this guy's gonna wander into a half
100%. Yeah, I mean that was always part of his
right.
thing, right? And
Right.
he's in that way is a predecessor, I think, of the kind of Jewish Schlemiel in a way. You know,
Yes,
there's an
yes.
early Woody Allen or a
Yes.
Dustin Hoffman kind of element to how he fits into the masculine world.
But
Right.
yes,
right.
combined with this sort of childlike innocence, the world is moving too fast around him.
Right.
Yeah.
He's kind of guileless, I
Right.
guess. Right.
But yeah, you like second 10 minutes of the movie basically arranging the meet cute of the two of them ending up, unbeknownst to them, rivals from these two warring families in the same caboose train car. And then you have like 10 minutes that is cutting in between train gags that really don't involve Buster that directly. They're much more him riffing on what could be funny to watch a train do, how a train could move, but it's not like they're Buster stunts.
Yeah, no, again, I feel like it's almost a mental sketch of the general, right? Because he's
Yes.
trying to figure out how can a train be a character, which this
Right.
train is, but
Right.
in the general, it's the main character, the title character.
The train is a character in this sequence, but Buster is fairly passive within it. And then you're just cutting into the carriage where you're watching meet cute stuff between
Right.
the two of them. You're seeing their charming relationship develop, but
Cute
they're
when they're asleep on each
vaguely
other's
disconnected.
shoulders. Yeah.
You have the great bit where he's trying to figure out how to put the top hat on with the low ceiling, and then when the car hits a speed bump, or the train car hits a speed bump, it goes down his head, and he goes like, "Fuck it, I'm wearing the pork pie hat. Like I
Yes.
gotta wear the classic Buster hat." Basically justifying its own origin. But then, yeah, 30 minutes in, train arrives, everyone puts together, holy shit, that's the son from the rival family.
Right. He finds the estate is just like this rundown shack.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
And 30 minutes into a 75-minute movie,
Which
the
I guess
film
is also
basically
making fun of the Hatfields and McCoys, right? That is sort of like, why are you guys fighting over
Yeah,
what
what
was
is this?
clearly like just like Appalachian shacks,
Right.
like or whatever, right?
But the other family's totally well off. He's
Yes.
totally oblivious.
I think that was also the vibe. One of the Hatfields and McCoys was poor and one was rich.
Sure.
Anyway, go on. Sorry.
And the rest of the movie now is just he's crazy about this girl.
yes.
He wants to spend time with
And
her.
she likes him.
Yes. And they don't know all this other shit happening around them. And everyone wants to kill him.
They want to kill him, but they can't kill him in their home.
No.
Right.
That's their version of hospitality.
Right. That's the one rule.
So you basically have 3 reels setting up the reality of the movie, the dramatic stakes, all of that, right?
Right.
To then get to the point where you're now like, here's a good 4-reeler, a classic Buster Keaton, everything's set up, the dynamic is clear, here are his rivals, here's what they want to do, here's why he's oblivious to it. He's oblivious on multiple counts. And yeah, the humor in this sort of like the maintaining of Southern hospitality, some idea of Southern hospitality. All they want to do is kill this guy, but they can't do it at the dinner table. They can't do it on these terms. They have to get his attention over here. There's so much of the I feel like a lot of the Buster character, I mean, we've talked about this in both of these movies, but like he's like a toddler who is mimicking the behavior of adults without totally understanding what it is. So much of the stuff once he's in the house of everyone sort of winking at each other and eyeballing each other, and he just starts copying that without quite understanding, or like the never-ending series of handshakes, These things where he's like, there's some language being spoken between adults in these gestures and these behaviors that I don't understand, but I think I get it and I'll just start doing it.
It also really lends itself to farce,
Yes.
the kind of rule in the house that you can't kill anybody who's on the grounds. Just it makes the entire house into this stage set where it's sort of like every entrance into a door, exit,
Yes.
right, has something to do with that game. So even after he figures it out, then there's a new vein of humor of him trying not to leave, right?
Yes.
Right.
Which is very funny.
Well, he's just
actually.
better home. He loves it here. He's in
Yeah,
love with
right.
this girl. He's got a hut.
Yeah, you mentioned John Roberts. I did not read. So John Roberts,
Oh, Joe.
Joe Roberts, sorry,
Yeah.
plays the sort of main Canfield, the main bully.
The-
right? He's
the
the
pa-
big guy.
Yeah.
He died like right after this movie was made.
Yeah, this is the last film he did with
He had a
Keaton after having
stroke.
been in virtually all of his shorts.
He's in all the shorts.
He's
right.
in 3 Ages, right? He's one of the cavemen. He appears throughout. He's just kind of one of the go-to heavies, and had also been a friend of the whole Keaton family since Keaton's childhood because he was a vaudeville guy.
Right.
So yeah, it's real sad for Joe Roberts fans, and I think he's one of the great foils Keaton had in his career. That he had a stroke during the making of this movie and died, I think, shortly before it was released.
Yes, he had a stroke. He returned to set, finished shooting, and then suffered another stroke and died.
Yeah,
Yes.
basically it was the very, very last thing he did.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But he's the perfect foil for Keaton in terms of size, right? And he also just gets it. I feel like he fits into those universes that Keaton creates, in the way that his great leading ladies did, and just some of his regulars.
He's just the thing of, in this one, obviously he's got the whole get up with the sort of whiskers and the, but like when you look up, like they just knew back then that putting a hat on a guy was really all you needed to
angle,
do.
the tilt,
the angle of the hat.
Yeah.
He's got this like square head, like a Frankenstein.
He has tremendous presence, right? I mean, even though he often plays the bad guy, there's something very lovable about Joe Roberts.
Yeah, he's lovable. He's got a good face. His eyes are kind of, I don't know, like beady, and like that for some reason that's kind of involving about him. Maybe, I don't know. The weird makeup that they would wear.
Also, him in the de-aging of the first prologue just cracks me up in his curly wig, the bewigged Joe Roberts.
But yes, he is very funny. Natalie Talmadge. So Natalie Talmadge is who he wanted. He wanted a different Talmadge in Three Ages, right? I already forgot.
The sister, right?
Yeah.
But this is the one he's married to.
Yes, his wife.
Yes, and this is her last movie ever.
She's gorgeous.
Yeah.
She was also pregnant with their second child while making the movie, which he thought was a real mistake when he realized that, she would be showing by the end. So she's like standing behind bushes and things like that. Also, their first son is the baby at the beginning who plays the little Willie. So there's actually 4 Keatons in this movie. There's Natalie, there's Buster, there's little Buster, who's billed as Buster Jr. His name was actually Joseph. Later changed to Jimmy because when they divorced, Natalie changed his name.
That is brutal.
Yes. And there's also Joe Keaton. Joe Keaton,
right? Joe
the dad,
is in this.
Is the engineer. He's the grumpy train driver.
This is the one with the most family.
The most Keatons
in it.
Because the whole Joseph thing is some family tradition. So once they divorced, she was like, "I am removing our son from your."
I mean, it was just it was such a bitter divorce on her part that she didn't want him to have any part of his father's name. So his name became Jimmy Talmadge instead of Joseph Keaton.
Yeah. And then wasn't there a thing that when the sons reached adult age, they went to court and were like, we like double signed this name change thing.
Right.
Am I wrong
really?
about this? I think I read that somewhere that she had sort of said, never mind, my kids are Talmadges now, they're not Keatons. And then when the kids hit their 20s, they like went to court and were like, we want to legally be Talmadges. We co-sign what our mother decided as
that
children.
may be the case because I think it was one of those things where they were pretty much kept apart. I mean, he had the legal right to see them, but she was really vindictive about it. So it wasn't until their mid-teens or so that they reconnected with him.
Yeah, I mean, they had a marriage going from artistic collaborators to then basically people who lived under the same roof in separate beds and didn't have much to do to each other to people who like hated each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure in hospitality that you could call them artistic collaborators.
Sure.
The fascination with Natalie is that their marriage is such a black box. There's no writing she left behind. She didn't give any interviews about him. There's stories about her, essentially hating him till the day of her death and trying to turn the whole family against him, but she never really said anything publicly about it. And so almost everything you know about her as a human being comes from watching her performance in this movie, which is so opaque. She's not bad, but she does not engage with the camera, really. She's not the funniest of his leading ladies. She doesn't get any chance to do physical comedy or anything like that.
Some actual warmth between the two of them at this point,
I think
which translates on screen.
I agree. I think there's a dramatic rapport there, but it's fascinating to watch her and wonder what their marriage was like at this point, because it's such a period of him being obsessed with work,
Well, and also by all accounts, yes, he was not a precious artiste, but he was a workaholic. And then the thing that sort of takes their marriage from people on pleasant terms with each other who have drifted apart and don't have much in common to active animosity and fighting was by all accounts his alcoholism, which is very much him like fulfilling the cycle of his father. But it feels like he never seemed like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong here, like an angry drunk and more of a sort of sad sack
Melancholy
drunk.
Well, I also think in 1923 he didn't really have a drinking problem. I'm sure he was a
I'm
big
saying
social
later.
drinker, but
Yes,
yeah, it
yes,
was the
yes.
drinking and
It was-
infidelity and unhappiness
it's
came
the
along
career
with
shit.
professional unhappiness.
exactly.
And with him, basically, maybe he, ignored his family and drank too much the way most dads of the 1920s
Right.
did. But the main thing throughout the mid-20s, I think, is that he found his true happiness in making
Yes.
movies.
Right. It's in the 30s and the 40s when it just feels like he just gets defeated by everything and just becomes like a sad sack.
Well, and
in a
by
lot of ways.
1940, though, he starts to turn it around. And this is something I really wanted to emphasize in the book is that even though there is a really tragic chapter in the middle of his life, it is not at all the case that he just simply
No.
went downhill and drank himself to death. And in fact, his story ends up having a happy ending.
The last 20 years of his life, he was basically kind of reclaimed, reappreciated. He obviously doesn't do work on the same level he did in the 20s, but it's like he's back on TV, he's in major movies. People like love him as a figure.
Yeah, he never lacked for work after about
No.
1937 or so, but there
Yeah.
were those dark, dark years in the mid 30s.
But like later, he's like a mascot in those later things, like when he's in
Yeah.
Funny
yes.
Thing Happened on My Way to the
Yes.
Farm or whatever.
Yes.
Right.
Right. And he'll have short run TV shows and
Right.
things like that. He's around. But yes, when he shows up in those things, it's sort of more
Kinda
like
the little
a nod to
relic.
film history.
Right, exactly.
The
yeah.
sadness is that he didn't get much time behind the camera after that. He was always
Yes,
in
that's the
demand
real-
as a performer. Once he got through his worst drinking years, people always wanted him to perform in this and that,
Yes.
whether it was live or on a screen. But he didn't get much of a chance to certainly do both at once, which was his greatest skill always, that he's the guy in front of and behind the camera and having great ideas in both places. The fact that that skill was wasted for so many years is the saddest part.
Yeah, they'd bring him in as like an older expert to be a gag writer for things, but his hands weren't really deeply invested in the thing. Or he'd be used as a performer, but in a way where it felt like they didn't really understand. It's a little similar to a lot of the American Jackie Chan movies, where it's like the entire way you're building this around him does not play to his strengths.
And part of that was just where the industry was at, right?
Yeah.
Because after sound came in, there just wasn't that freedom anymore. There was
Yes.
nobody except Chaplin, because he was so wealthy he could afford to make movies every 6 years or
Right.
something like that.
Right, he didn't have to. Right.
But nobody
Rush it
had
out.
that kind of, that loosey-goosey, like crazy, make it up as you go along freedom that he had in the 20s.
Yeah, I mean, Jackie Chan is in so many ways like, the modern heir apparent to Keaton, especially in the way he made his own films and built his own industry and his own, sort of family of collaborators and all of that. But he talks about that so much where, like, when he would come over to the States, try to make American films, and they'd be like, why can't you do the stunts that you're doing in the Hong Kong films here in these American films? And he's like, because I take 3 months to practice each stunt. And then I do 200 takes of it until the one take
Right.
that works out well. And you guys don't want to give me the time to do that. And I think Jackie Chan, it just kind of went like, look, if they'll pay me, I'll do this. Whatever. I'm fine, right? It wasn't. And he certainly was getting paid very well. And the movies were big enough that he didn't feel defeated by that. Keaton, as much as he did have a little bit of a renaissance in the last 20 years of his life, there's some sadness to the fact that no one ever just sort of went like, you know this better than we do.
Right.
Hands off. Try to do your thing again. And the Limelight, the end sequence with Chaplin and Keaton together at the end of Limelight feels like the most pure Keaton you get in those final 20 years. But that's because he's being supported by someone who
gets
still has the freedom to make things the way he wants to and is backing off and letting him kind of do his thing.
Even there, though, and there's a bunch about this in the book too, I find Limelight such a frustrating movie because it's the only time the two work together in front of a camera, right?
Chaplin didn't want to let him steal
And
too much.
It's
Right.
just, it's hard to know exactly what went onto the cutting room floor,
Yes.
why the framing is the way it is.
Yes.
Even more than the editing, the framing of that Limelight scene bothers me because you don't see them both at once enough.
No.
Right. And
It-
so, and the whole interaction of two clowns on stage together, two great legendary clowns, should be that they're aware of each other,
Yes.
and giving and taking from each other.
Chaplin, like, it let him be Keaton more successfully than anyone else in decades, but also would not let him be the best that he could be because
And by
it would
all accounts, the
start to make
people
him
in
look
the
shit.
room, like
Yeah.
the audience that was watching the filming of that Limelight scene, was like on the floor laughing
Yes.
at the stuff Keaton was coming up with, and you don't see the vast majority of it
Yeah.
on
I
screen.
mean, just quickly, Limelight is like
It's his swan song film. So Chaplin's swan song film came out in the 50s.
about a sort of washed up performer trying to give it one last go, and Keaton is his former partner he hasn't talked to in years, and you finally get to the end set piece, which is like they're going to share the stage, and it's great, but also it should be the greatest scene
It should
in
be
history of
incredible,
movies.
and instead it's sort of
Yeah.
interesting and pretty good.
Yeah.
And he weirdly won an Oscar for it 20 years later because the Oscars kind of fudged the rules and said it never came out in LA and now it's eligible.
Yeah.
Because he'd never won an Oscar.
Yes.
That was them. Anyway,
this
weird
final
Oscar history.
set piece of our
The
Oscar holiday,
waterfall.
the
Come
waterfall.
on, guys. What the fuck? How do you
Come
pull
on.
that off? How do you do that?
I mean,
JJ
even before the waterfall,
Yes.
with there's the nearly drowning sequence,
Which is
we
also
have
very
to talk
funny.
about, right?
Yes.
Because we talked about the fall not working or the jump not working in the Three Ages. Well, here there's an even closer shave that he
Yes.
has with death, where the wire that was holding him, when he's being washed by the rapids down to the waterfall, the wire broke. So there's this
Yes.
moment that he's, going through the Truckee, I guess I don't know what river it is there. It's near Truckee,
It's the
California.
Truckee River. It's
Is
in
it?
somewhere near Tahoe.
Mhm.
Right.
And they're
up in-
real
yeah,
rapids. They're actually dangerous. That's why he had a wire, right? Not
Mhm.
usually typically a thing Keaton would do. And apparently it was a really scary moment. And he had already told them in advance, keep rolling no matter what happens, right?
Mhm.
But they basically filmed him nearly drowning. Then he manages to grab onto a bush, which you see in the same shot.
Yes.
And the part I love of that story is that after they went down to get him, and I think he may have been, he was maybe unconscious, but he was full of water and stuff. And when he sort of came to, the first thing he asked was, "Did Nat see?" Like he
Yes.
wanted to know whether his wife saw him, which you could read two ways. Did
Yes.
she see because I don't want her to be worried, or did she see because I want to impress her? And I
Right,
think it was
right.
the latter, right?
They said, I'm afraid she did. Right. And then he said, did you get it?
And so once again, as with Three Ages, they use that footage, which makes it all the more exciting, right? I mean, of course, we don't necessarily know the wire is breaking, but if you know that and you watch it, you can see the moment that the kind of danger increases.
There's the sense of panic to him, like grabbing things. And yeah. They were inventing a lot of stuff on the fly there. But like the waterfall itself is in a studio, correct? Like that's
I'm
the
trying to find. Wait,
Yeah, I think they
I
built
got
the
it. I got it for you
waterfall.
here.
They built
Okay.
the waterfall over a tank, over a swimming pool.
right. They made
Right.
a replica waterfall in a studio swimming pool, which is pretty cool.
And that's all a matte, beautifully painted matte in the
Right.
background, which works really well. The effect still holds up, I think.
It does, which is always
There's some on-set photos that are worth Googling of that moment, because not only can you see the setup and sort of how they created the illusion of the
Yes.
waterfall, but you see that Keaton looks sort of scared. It's the moment right before he was going to do the jump, and he's tied, at the waist and standing on this kind of wooden ledge.
Right.
You can see the artifice around him, and he does not look very confident about the jump he's about to do.
It was dangerous. He ingested a massive amount of water doing it, to the extent that they had to like get a doctor to look at him.
I wonder if that was before or after the wire broke. I don't know which order they shot it in, but it
I'm
would
not
make
sure
you
what
more
order it was in.
apprehensive.
Yes.
But right. Because they had these like pumps like pushing the water because pushing it back up or whatever. The fall was 6 inches deep, and he would get caught underneath it, and it would just like pump water into his mouth. Like, I mean, don't mess with waterfalls, guys.
Yeah, he's hanging
I know
upside down
movies
there
make it
for a
look
minute.
like, hey, you go down there, it's scary, but then you pop up and you're okay. Like, no.
It's funny how many of his worst injuries were caused by water too. Like water was always kind of
Well, it's
tricky.
like the number
Yeah.
one thing in Hollywood to this day is like,
Yeah.
if you're going to make a movie with water, like prepare for nightmares,
Right.
basically. Like, it's still the most difficult thing to contend with
Yes.
and fake, I
Yes.
guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I read somewhere that like the production on set stills from this were basically kept secret for decades.
Because they didn't want to reveal how they did it.
Right.
Right.
He
right.
was like, so no, just let people buy into the thing.
Right,
Let it look real. I don't want them thinking of this as a special effect. But I think, yeah, it's like an incredibly sophisticated combination of massive sets, map paintings, forced perspective models placed closer to camera to build this out as a huge landscape.
And the illusion is perfect, and that
Yes.
moment is it's completely not funny, right? It's
Yeah,
a pure
right.
thrill. It's like a Douglas Fairbanks like swashbuckling stunt, and it's still. I mean, I've heard in the past year people gasp, at that moment
Yes.
of the rescue, and of course she's replaced by a doll at that moment.
Yeah,
Which,
right.
if you look closely, you can see like it's just a
She's
rag doll,
flopping around.
but you're not looking at her. You're
No,
looking at
It
him.
would be insane if his pregnant wife was being thrown down waterfalls.
Yes. That's what Joe Sr. would have done.
Right. This movie was a huge hit, right? Like, this is the movie Three Ages did well. This
Yeah.
movie did like colossally well, I think, right? Like, this sort of
Yeah, I
breaks
mean,
into
I don't know.
another
Like, yeah,
level
I
of
think
success.
Joe Skank was very happy with it. Put it that way. It gave him the freedom to go on and start to make bigger movies and build toward the general, which is sort of the most freedom he ever got to
Yeah.
make a movie, the most money he spent. I think for him, creatively and professionally, that would sort of be the pinnacle, the general. And this is what
yes.
enabled that path.
It was a point of pride for him that his films were cheaper than Lloyd's and Chaplin's, that he was sort of more focused and lean. There were not indulgences in that kind of way. So as much as he had a blank check, it's like he would only spend the money relative to how successful his last movie was in terms of what he felt was the responsible amount. to still make a film highly profitable.
Right.
But
But
yeah,
it was still that independent era where Joe
Yes.
Skank is just happy that he's turning a profit.
Right.
You know, it's only a few years later when Louis Lumiere starts turning huge profits by using the kind of factory style
Yes.
studio system that Joe Skank realizes, wait, there's real money to be had
Right.
here.
What am I doing with one guy?
a crazy stat: they would shoot this movie with 2 cameras side by side, running concurrently,
Okay.
so that they would have one negative for America and one negative for overseas.
Oh,
It's
that
just
makes
such a
sense.
physical
That's-
media moment, right? Where
that's
you
so
realize like it
funny.
really is just stuff in a can that has to
Yes.
be mailed around.
But
Right.
sometimes when they, because some of his movies had been lost and then they put them back together or they're cobbled together from crappy elements, and they're constantly trying to come up with better versions, the best possible, most pristine versions of these films, and the versions we have right now are generally really good and better than they've been in a long time. But when people are trying to compare elements, very often you're like, oh, this is off by 2 inches.
Right.
We have like 2 different versions of this scene, and one of them's from the overseas print and one of them is from the domestic print. Which one's the better one to use?
Right.
It's fascinating thing to consider.
Now, cowards say that there was not going to be a box office game,
Cowards have said that.
but they were wrong.
And can I call my shot?
Go ahead.
I'm gonna nail these 5 for 5.
I don't think you're going to.
I'm gonna nail. I know.
I have
I
heard
remember
of
when these movies
0
came out.
of these.
I remember when these came out. I was a freshman in college.
3 Ages.
Okay.
September 24th, 1923.
Okay. September
Okay.
24th, 19. Okay, so sort of a dead period at the box office. You're coming off of summer blockbusters, but award season hasn't ramped up. Okay, I think I can get these.
Now, the number 1 film of 1923, I will spoil for you because it's not on this list, is Cecil B. DeMille's original 10 Commandments, the silent version of it, which I've never seen, although I've seen like some clips from it, right? Like there's like some surviving, or I mean, probably, I mean, like I've seen the things that he then later replicated,
I think it's back in.
Yeah,
in-
it exists. I'm more like, I've seen bits of it.
I'm surprised they went the remake route rather than making a sequel.
Yeah.
It just add out 11th Commandment. It would have been so easy to just
Totally.
fucking up the stakes. Ocean's
right.
rules.
I don't know how am I supposed to do this? Okay, so
Give
the
me
number
hints.
1 film, it's new this week. It stars Alexander Carr and Barney Bernard.
Okay.
It's a silent comedy based on ethnic Jewish caricature, based on a Broadway play of the same name.
Okay. I'm gonna suggest. I'm gonna guess that it's called Oi Gewalt.
It's called Potash and Perlmutter.
I should buy the remake rights to this.
Isn't
I
that
was going to guess
crazy?
the Coens and Kellys, which was another series of the Irish Jewish comedy, but Potash and Perlmutter has that.
There they are,
Yeah.
Potash and Perlmutter on the screen at last. It's like one of those classic early silent things where they're like, well, these guys have been tearing up, Broadway for 20 years
Yeah.
doing their shtick.
This is all I'm saying. Barry Keoghan, Griffin Newman, Potash and Perlmutter.
Potash
ready to
and
go.
Perlmutter. So that's number 1 this week. All right,
Mhm.
number 2, it stars Pola Negri and Jack Holt.
Ah, fuck! I know this.
Oh, I also want to tell you that
Yeah.
Potash and Perlmutter has opened to $86,000. Not
Humongous.
bad.
That's humongous. Yeah.
And this is a film by it's a remake of a Cecil B. DeMille film. Interesting.
interesting.
It's by George Fitzmaurice, the director, who made The Son of the Sheik, which is a famous Rudolph Valentino film.
It's not the Sheik.
Cheek.
Yeah.
Sheik.
Based on a public domain thing.
I don't fucking know what it's based on.
I don't know. Is it like?
It's
is it about Jesus?
It's about a
Is it someone from
beautiful,
the Bible?
young South American woman, and she's been betrothed to Don Pablo, and she falls in love with a New York City stockbroker. I mean, it sounds pretty good. It's called The Cheat,
I mean, that's a good title.
and the poster
Uh-huh.
is great because it's Pola Negri here pointing,
I mean,
I assume, at the cheat.
what kind of numbers was it doing?
218 grand it's made so
What
far.
are we talking?
the
Like
next-
5 screens?
Yeah, sure. The next one is a Western from the
Okay.
sound of it, a silent Western. Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna guess it's called Put 'Em Up.
It's called The Covered Wagon.
I should always go with a the.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the looks like a sort of, expedition film. Covered
Okay.
wagons.
Mhm.
I don't have much for you on that one. Okay, the next one is all right. This is actually going to be really fun that we keep
Yeah.
doing this. There were so many movies back then. They
And-
just churned them out.
75% of them are lost to time.
This one, there's nothing on it. It's directed by Charles Braben,
Mhm.
stars Corinne Griffith and Frank Mayo. It looks like it's set on a boat.
Oh fuck! Which Resident Evil is this? Is this Afterlife or is it Retribution?
It's called 6 Days.
Okay.
And the final film in the top 5 this week, let me see. Yes, it's a romantic drama directed by Alan Dwan, starring Gloria Swanson.
Okay.
The great Gloria Swanson.
Oh, Alan Dwan is a great director of that
Which,
time.
of course, means that it was a Paramount film. And it's a person's name.
Yeah.
Is the title.
I'm going to guess Samantha.
It's called Zaza.
Well, that was not the game I was going to guess.
And did you read Marshall Schaefer's, is that his name? Marshall Schaefer? The Oscar book? What the hell's it called? No, not Marshall Schaefer.
Michael Schulman?
Michael Schulman. There you
Yeah,
go.
I
Marshall
reviewed
Schaefer's
it.
another film.
Mhm.
That story he has about Gloria Swanson returning to the Paramount lot for Sunset Boulevard. And she's sort of like mothballed at that point. And she's like, is anyone even going to care about me? And she sees that her face is still on this big mural that's like painted on the side of the lot, like at the front. And she's kind of touched. And the guy who painted that mural approaches her and he's like, thank God for your face, because everyone always wants to be at the front, all the news stars. And so I just keep you up there because, like, everyone
That's
respects
nice.
you.
It settles the matter.
Right.
Yeah.
And she's very touched by it. It's a
I'm
great film.
surprised that 6 Days was such a big hit.
All right. Enough out of you.
Keaton's already done 1 week as a 2-reeler, right? Why would anyone see a day less at a longer running?
That's a good point. Okay.
It's a fucking ripoff, if you ask me.
Now, Our Hospitality came out only 2 months later,
Wow.
November 1923.
Grossed 20% more, as JJ stat here. It did about $500,000, a little over.
So number 1, of course, is a New York set film starring Marion Davies.
Okay.
People might know her.
Here's what I'm going to guess it's called.
Famously, William Randolph Hearst's mistress.
I'm going to guess that it's called The New York.
It's called Little Old New York.
Well, I was pretty close.
Yeah. You've also got a new film, a Western about a real person.
Okay. This one is Billy the Kid.
You're close. Wild Bill Hickok.
Oh, fuck. Okay, I'm going to get one of these.
I'm trying to figure out who was playing him here.
I'm looking for partial credit. I'm looking to get enough correct
William Hart.
in a wanton
a
guess.
classic silence.
Oft parodied by Buster Keaton.
Right. He was sort of like the John Wayne of his
He
day,
was the
right?
sentimental cowboy, the weeping cowboy.
Right. Okay, Griff, you actually will know and possibly has even seen the next one.
Fuck. Okay.
It's an adaptation of a famous French novel.
It's an adaptation of a
starring a master of the horror genre at the time.
Oh, it must have been
well, it's not London After Midnight, right? That's a
No.
lost film.
French novel.
French. It's not Phantom of the Opera.
No, it's the other one.
Fuck.
The
It's like Lon Chaney's
Bells!
Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes. The Hunchback of Notre
God
Dame.
damn it. Okay. Yeah.
Which that's kind of a famous one, right? He's got
yeah.
crazy Quasimodo makeup on.
He's the best. Yeah, I mean, he's the best version of all those monsters. He's the best Phantom of the Opera.
Yes.
Really, another great rabbit hole to go down is see all of Lon Chaney's movies. Doesn't take long, and
Yeah.
he's just brilliant beyond belief.
He doesn't have that many, or that many surviving films.
He
Right.
died fairly young. He
Right.
died after only one sound film.
Do you know London After Midnight, David?
No.
It is a completely lost movie that only stills exist for, but the character design is so fucking insane that people lose their minds about, like, God, we gotta find this
Oh,
fucking
I've
thing.
seen this design before. It's very cool with the top hat. And
Yes.
the
The sort of stretched out eyes and the
Cool.
creepy goblin teeth.
Very
Yeah.
cool. All right, now, number 4, exciting news for you.
Okay.
The Covered Wagon is still in the top 5.
Wow.
People want the wagon.
Wagon the sleeper hit at 23.
And the number 5 is a cross-dressing drama. Girl dressing as a boy
Okay.
to, I think, it looks like she wants to play the violin.
It's called
Do you have any cast
The
names?
Violinist.
Anna Nielsen,
Mm-hmm.
James Kirkwood, Tully Marshall.
Is
Anna
it
Nilsson.
called-
She was a sort of a Greta Garbo ripoff Swedish star.
Yeah,
I don't
she was.
see.
You're
this
right.
is this is showing
See,
me.
you
see-
know your silent stars
Yeah.
better
well, but
than
see, I feel like this is showing me up as somebody who doesn't have a deep enough knowledge of non-comic silent films because I haven't gotten a single one of these.
But that is such a deep well.
Yes.
And it's like half artistic to understand these things, but half like historical excavation, right? Like,
Also,
like trying to find
the comedy
these...
and the horror films are preserved more than the straight dramas, even
It's
though they were
true.
the biggest films.
Yeah,
at the
Because the
time.
straight
even though-
dramas
yeah.
are boring.
Well, just silent drama has aged differently. I think
Yeah.
it's still fascinating to watch, but it
Yeah.
feels like a historical document.
It's an
Yes.
artifact more
Yes.
than anything else, right?
Is this movie
I
called?
mean, like, The Crowd is incredible, obviously. There are great
Oh
silent
yeah, I mean,
dramas,
and especially in the late 20s,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
all the Lon Chaney stuff, man, just so good.
Sorry, go ahead.
is it called The Violinist?
No, it's called Ponjola. You never would have gotten it. So that's our box office game. Look forward to 5 more editions of
Can't
that.
fucking wait.
I kind of can't
Potash
either.
and Perlmutter too.
Potash
Still
and Perlmutter
muttering.
is really top
Yeah.
to top. It's, yeah.
I hope we
haven't-
see like Potash and Perlmutter go bananas and like, yeah.
I don't know. I think
How many of them did they make? They must have come on. They, didn't
they
stop at
did
one.
2 sequels. They did 2 sequels.
Okay, don't tell me what the names are. 'Cause I'm
No,
hoping
they
they're
might
coming
come up.
In the third one, the S in Potash is a 3.
Yeah, right. Yes, Potash and Perlmutter cubed. Yeah, this ethnic Jewish
Yeah.
humor. That's really crazy.
I would have made a fucking killing in this day.
All right. We have to be done. Thank God we're doing the next episode on a different day. We initially were
Yes.
going to do these back to back, and then Dana was
spacing
quickly
them
like,
out.
that might be crazy.
And you'll be able to hear that episode in 4 days, May 11th, Patreon, Buster Shorts. Dana, you're the best.
Man, taping this show is one of the few podcast things I do that gives me energy instead of draining it away.
Well,
I love it.
That's very nice to hear
Nice to hear.
because it drains my energy.
Yeah.
But I'm glad we give people energy.
Well,
You're
it's
taking my
because it's
energy.
your job. You know, I'm coming here for fun. Like I just taped my own podcast. That was draining. Love
Yes.
it, but it's exhausting.
A-
Then I
a
come
day of
here
the
and I
coal
fill
mine.
the well up again.
Doing Culture Gab Fest.
I'm
I'll
so
tell
glad to
you,
hear that.
My mom is always excited when you're on the show. You're in the very limited group of guests that she
She'll listen.
she tries to listen other times. But I think she likes it when there's an actual grown up on the show who makes us behave. Like you and Bilga.
Wait, now I feel like a school marm.
No,
You're not a school
no,
marm. We just
no.
respect you deeply.
We
and
respect you deeply.
Want to not
You're a voice of
just
actual
be annoying.
authority. Yes. I think we meet in the middle here, right? I think you're like, this is fun. You guys are silly. And we're like, oh, Dana's making us behave a little better than we usually do. And it's a good meeting point. Dana, everyone should read Cameraman, get the audiobook, listen to it, however you want to digest it. And also Slate Culture Gabfest podcast that you co-host. People should listen to that and read all the stuff you write at Slate.
Yeah, all I can say is the actual life story of Keaton and his work and his historical context is just so much more than we could possibly scratch the surface of here,
Yes.
even though we've been talking for so long
We've
and it's
been
been so
hitting
fun to
cliff
talk. But
notes.
just if any of this stuff intrigues you, dive
Yeah.
into that book, dive into anything else about him. Also, can I recommend a great documentary about Keaton?
Please.
This is really good background if you want to dive into this whole
Yeah.
series.
Your book is has such broad context too, which I do
That's the
feel
thing.
like
I
will
was
be
like,
so
if you
interesting
like
for people.
this show,
It's
you are
not
perhaps
just
a
like,
connoisseur of
Buster
context.
Keaton was born,
Right.
yon day.
It's-
and,
Dana
like,
Yeah,
has
I
written
don't
the
think of it as
opening
a
context
biography.
book.
It's sort of like
Yeah.
a
It's the dawn of
critical
cinema.
exploration of his whole
It's
lifespan.
placing him in a time.
Yeah. Anyway, the
What's
documentary to
documentary,
watch on him is on YouTube in 3 parts. It's a British documentary from the 80s, and it's called A Hard Act to Follow by
Okay.
by the
I've never
great,
seen
great silent film scholar Kevin Brownlow. So you'll really see just clips of all this stuff, like images of him from childhood, just a lot of great background, and it's beautifully done. So Hard Act to Follow. Watch it.
Okay.
Okay. It's probably like on YouTube. I mean,
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
just said it was on
those
YouTube,
things
yeah.
are right. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what? I was
Well-
looking it up.
Well, you know what?
We'll definitely have Marie post a picture of him in the beard balding as his kid. Because
we will.
you got to see it.
Yeah, the upsetting miniature Irishman, Buster.
Look,
gotta
here's
see
all I'm
Irish.
saying. We can divorce this from the negative stereotyping of the Irish, but I think we should bring this look back. We can call it something different. But I think little kids should have receding hairlines and chin strap
Like-
beards.
Like how this is an Irish guy. Like
Yes.
it's like that's an Irish guy,
Yeah.
but like that's the joke. The sort of old image of an Irishman.
Yeah.
You should have a big beard, is all I'm saying.
Maybe I should.
Big
Yeah, maybe you
bushy
should.
beard.
Maybe I should.
All right. We gotta
Okay.
be done.
Thank you all for listening. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you to Marie Barty for our social media and posting a picture of Buster Keaton as a kid with a bald wig and a chin strap beard. Thank you to Joe Bowen and Pat Reynolds for our artwork, JJ Birch for our research, which a lot of research necessary for this series, and he's done an incredible job on these dossiers, and also somehow kept them shorter,
Yes, good job.
but they're
JJ.
dense,
Yes. Nice
full
and
of good
dense.
meat. Thank you to AJ McKeon, Alex Barron for our editing, Lane Montgomery and the Great American Novel for our theme song. You can go to blankcheckpod.com for links to some real nerdy shit, including our Patreon Blank Check special features, where we do franchise commentaries. We're doing the Planet of the Apes series right now, the classic Planet of the Apes movies. But also, as we said, we will have a Buster Keaton Shorts, Dana's Pick, a curated selection of Buster Shorts episode coming up soon there.
And now on the Patreon, Griff, we
Mhm.
have a new option for
Yes.
fans. This is an alpha test.
Oh, baby.
So it's brand new feature on
No
Patreon.
betas allowed.
Exactly. Basically an option for people to join our Patreon for free so they can stay updated on what's going on there without jumping in
That's
to
the thing.
subscribe,
Basically,
to sort of get a sense of it.
we've been unlocking episodes after 2 years and making them free, but that requires going to the Patreon page and looking up from when those things got posted and are now unlocked. And we've just it's a streamlined process now. You can sign
Yes.
up for a free membership. You'll get notified whenever an old episode gets unlocked for free.
And you'll also get notified about new stuff. And if any of that tickles your fancy, you can get notified about new stuff. And if you can upgrade to paid to check it out if you want or whatever.
Or whatever. But what's really nice is that, like Griffin was saying, with the process now, it's a little bit more, labor intensive.
Gotta
Whereas
comb through the archives.
once you sign up for this free membership, you'll receive an email notification, but you'll also be able to get a private RSS.
I mean, this is the real.
And then you'll be able to get
that private RSS. You're not having to go listen in browser.
You want to listen to us talk about Iron Man 2 and without a care in the world of pandemics in our voices.
I think we're up to pandemic now. I think now we're unlocking pandemic episodes.
We're actually in the Star Wars.
Okay, so not quite.
I'm about to clog a toilet. Very shortly, we'll be doing Toy Story pandemic episodes in which everyone feels normal.
Don't remember any of that. Honestly, a lot of that is a total blank to me.
Yeah.
But it exists, and it's becoming free because we make our Patreon
That lineup,
episodes
though,
free.
that 2020 lineup, we got Star Wars, Toy Story, Mission Impossible, Alien. It's good franchises.
No, it is.
Yeah.
Might have to do some of them again.
No,
we're being weird.
never going back. Tune in next week for
Sherlock Jr. and the Navigator.
Ooh, look at
that's
that.
kind of a big one.
2 fucking masterpieces.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Third time at bat, he makes one of the best films ever. Yep. So tune in for that.
Yep.
And as always, I'm just calling my shot. I'm going to go 5 for 5 on every box office game for the rest of this series.